When I arrived, my son and his in-laws had already finished their year-end dinner. My son sneered, "You are late, Dad. You will pay the bill right." My daughter-in-law smirked, still as slow as ever. They all laughed loudly, clinking their crystal glasses filled with wine that cost more than my first car. I looked at the waiter and called for the manager. Suddenly their faces turned pale. I am Lawrence Sterling, 73 years old, and for the first time in a decade, I decided that being a father did not mean being a doormat. If you have ever felt used by the people who are supposed to love you, hit that like button and subscribe, because what I did next was not revenge, it was a correction. The valet at Legrand looked at my rusted Ford pickup truck with the kind of disdain usually reserved for roadkill. He hesitated to even take the keys, holding them with 2 fingers, as if the rust might be contagious. I did not blame him. In a sea of polished Mercedes and Bentleys, my truck was an eyesore. But it was my eyesore, reliable, sturdy, and paid for 3 times over. I adjusted my tie in the rearview mirror. It was the same charcoal suit I had worn to my wife Catherine's funeral 5 years ago. The fabric was thinning at the elbows, and the style was hopelessly outdated, but it was clean. Catherine would have told me to buy a new one. She would have fixed my collar and kissed my cheek and told me I looked handsome. But Catherine was gone, and with her the only warmth in my life had evaporated, leaving me exposed to the cold reality of my remaining family. I walked through the heavy mahogany doors of the restaurant. The air inside smelled of truffles, expensive perfume, and old money. The hostess, a young woman with a tablet and a practiced smile, stopped me before I could take 2 steps. "Delivery entrance is around the back, sir," she said without looking up from her screen. I stopped. I did not raise my voice. I did not cause a scene. I simply looked at her until she felt the weight of my silence. "I am not the delivery man," I said, my voice gravelly from years of shouting over the roar of diesel engines and shipping container cranes. "I am here to dine. The Sterling table." Her eyes snapped up, widening as she took in my frayed cuffs and scuffed shoes. She tapped her screen frantically, looking for a reason to kick me out. When she found the reservation under my son's name, her professional mask slipped for a second, revealing pure confusion. "Right this way, Mr. Sterling." She led me through the dining room. I felt the eyes of the other patrons on me. I knew what they saw. An old man who had wandered into the wrong tax bracket. A relic. A mistake. They did not know that the logistics empire I had built from a single van moved the very luxury goods they were wearing. They did not know that I could buy this building and turn it into a parking lot without checking my bank balance. And I preferred it that way. Silence had always been my strategy. I saw them before they saw me. They were seated at the best table in the house, a semi-private alcove near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The table was a disaster zone of gluttony. Empty platters of seafood towers, half-eaten steaks, and no less than 4 empty bottles of wine stood like trophies of their consumption. My son Bradley sat at the head of the table where I should have been. He was laughing, his face flushed with alcohol, his expensive Italian suit straining against his softening midsection. Next to him was his wife Vanessa, whispering something in his ear that made him smirk. And across from them were Richard and Pamela, Vanessa's parents, the people who had spent the last 10 years treating my bank account like their personal emergency fund. I approached the table. Bradley was the first to notice. The smile didn't leave his face, but it changed. It lost its mirth and gained a sharp, cruel edge. "Look who finally decided to show up," he announced loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "We thought you got lost, Dad. Or did the truck break down again?" He laughed at his own joke. Vanessa joined in a high-pitched titter that grated on my nerves. "You are late, Lawrence," Pamela said, swirling the last of the red wine in her glass. "We went ahead and ordered. We were starving, and you know how slow you can be." She looked at me over the rim of her glasses, her eyes scanning my suit with open pity. Richard leaned back in his chair, unbuttoning his jacket to relieve his stomach. He burped softly and waved a hand. "Sit down, Larry." There might be some calamari left if you dig through the shells. Or just order a soup. At your age, chewing is a hazard anyway, right? I pulled out the heavy velvet chair and sat down. No one stood up to greet me. No one offered me a glass. No one asked how I was. I see you enjoyed yourselves, I said, looking at the carnage on the table. We had to celebrate, Richard boomed. Bradley here tells us he is close to closing a massive deal. We are toasting to the future, Larry. To success. Something the young generation seems to grasp quite well. I looked at my son. Bradley avoided my gaze, suddenly interested in his napkin. I knew there was no deal. I still had contacts inside the company I had founded. The company where I had installed Bradley as a figurehead director to give him a purpose. The reports I received were dismal. He spent more time at golf lunches than in the boardroom. The only deal he was closing was likely with a bookie. That is wonderful news, I lied, my voice flat. It is, Vanessa interjected sharply. That is why we ordered the vintage Cabernet. The sommelier recommended it. $2,000 a bottle, but for a celebration like this, it is an investment. She emphasized the word investment while looking directly at my chest pocket, where she knew I kept my wallet. $2,000 a bottle. I did the math. They had drunk 4. That was $8,000 just on fermented grapes. I thought about the warehouse workers in my old company, men who broke their backs for shifts to feed their families. $8,000 could change their lives. Here it was just colored urine to be flushed away by morning. So Pamela said, leaning forward, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier light. Diamonds I suspected Bradley had paid for using the supplementary credit card I gave him for emergencies. Are we going to talk about the summer house, Lawrence? Richard and I found a delightful property in the Hamptons. It is a bit of a fixer-upper, meaning it needs a complete overhaul, but the bones are good. We were thinking if you sold that drafty old mansion of yours, we could pool the resources. We would all live together. We could take care of you. I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. They wanted me to sell the home I built with Catherine, the home where every hallway held her memory, so they could use the money to buy a vacation status symbol for themselves. And the kicker was the promise to take care of me. They could not even pour me a glass of water at dinner. We can discuss real estate later, I said. The waiter appeared, a young man with slicked back hair and an air of impatience. He barely glanced at me, placing a leather folder in the center of the table. The bill, sir, he said. Bradley didn't even look at it. He just slid it across the white tablecloth toward me. You got this right, Dad? Bradley said casually, picking his teeth. I seem to have left my wallet in the other jacket. Rookie mistake. Vanessa let out a small laugh. Oh, Brad, you are terrible. But Grandpa doesn't mind, does he? He loves treating us. It makes him feel useful. Useful. The word hung in the air, heavy and toxic. That was what I was to them. Not a father, not a grandfather to the children they refused to bring to visit me, not a mentor. I was a utility, a walking checkbook, a rusted ATM machine that they could kick until cash fell out. I opened the folder. The number at the bottom was staggering. $8,420, including a 20% gratuity that they had automatically added, probably assuming the old man in the cheap suit would be too blind to notice. I looked up at them. 4 faces flushed with wine and greed, waiting for me to perform my function, waiting for the old dog to do his trick. Richard was already checking his watch, bored. Pamela was reapplying her lipstick using the reflection in a spoon. Vanessa was texting, probably bragging to her friends about the vintage wine. And Bradley, my son, the boy I had held in my arms when he was born, terrified I would drop him, was signaling the waiter for another round of cognac. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a loud snap, like a bone breaking. It was quiet, like a lock clicking into place. The lock on the door to my generosity. I closed the leather folder, I beckoned the manager who was hovering nearby, keeping a watchful eye on the table of high spenders. "Sir, is everything to your satisfaction?" the manager asked, ignoring me and addressing Richard. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise like a razor. "I have a question." The manager finally looked at me, his nose wrinkling slightly. "Yes." "Has this bill been settled?" Bradley laughed nervously. "Dad, what are you doing? Just give him the card." I ignored my son. I kept my eyes on the manager. "Has it been paid?" "No, sir," the manager said stiffly. "We are waiting for payment." "Good," I said. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. The table relaxed. They recognized the movement. It was the movement of salvation. But instead of my black limitless card, I pulled out a pair of reading glasses and a small plastic card. It was a credit card, but not mine. It was the supplementary card I had issued to Bradley 10 years ago. The card with my name on the account, but his name on the plastic. The card he used to buy those suits, those dinners, these people's affection. I held it up. The light caught the gold chip. "Bradley, that is your card, isn't it?" I asked. Bradley frowned, confused. "Yeah, Dad. You pay the bill for it. Just hand it to him." I looked at the waiter, then at the manager. "I am Lawrence Sterling," I said clearly. "I am the primary account holder for this card." I saw a flicker of recognition in the manager's eyes. He knew the name Sterling. He knew who signed the checks for the massive corporate events his restaurant catered. His posture straightened immediately. "Mr. Sterling, I apologize, I did not recognize you." I waved his apology away. "I want to report a theft." The table went silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. "A theft, sir?" the manager asked, alarmed. "Yes," I said, calm as a frozen lake. "This card, I believe it has been used fraudulently for years. The authorized user has violated the terms of our agreement. As of 5 p.m. this afternoon, I called the bank and reported it stolen. I canceled the authorization." I looked at Bradley. His face had gone from red to a sickly shade of gray. "Dad, what are you talking about?" he whispered. I took the card between my thumb and forefinger, and right there in the middle of the 5-star restaurant under the crystal chandelier, I snapped it in half. The sound was sharp and final. I dropped the 2 pieces of plastic onto the bill. "Payment declined," I said. Vanessa stood up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. "Are you insane? You cannot do that." We ate the food. We drank the wine. I looked up at her, my eyes cold. I didn't eat it. I didn't drink it. And since I am not the one who ordered it, I certainly am not the one paying for it. I stood up. My knees popped, but I felt taller than I had in years. I turned to the manager. "These people will be paying for their own consumption. I assume you have procedures for customers who cannot pay their bills." "Mr. Sterling, surely we can resolve this," Richard sputtered, trying to regain his composure, but his voice was trembling. "This is a misunderstanding. We don't carry that kind of liquidity on us." "Then I suggest you start washing dishes," I said. I turned to walk away. "Dad, wait!" Bradley pleaded, grabbing my sleeve. "Everyone is looking. You are embarrassing us." I pulled my arm away. "No, Bradley. You embarrassed yourself. You thought I was a bottomless pit. You thought I was stupid. You thought you could invite me to watch you eat my money and laugh in my face." I leaned in close so only he could hear. "Happy New Year, son. Good luck with the bill." I walked out of the restaurant. I could hear the chaos erupting behind me. I heard Vanessa screaming. I heard Richard trying to bluster his way out of it. I heard the manager's voice turn hard and professional, demanding valid payment methods. I walked out into the cold night air and took a deep breath. It smelled of exhaust and city rain, but to me it smelled like victory. I got into my rusted Ford truck. The valet held the door open for me this time with a newfound respect or perhaps fear. I tipped him $100 bill, the only cash I had planned to spend that night. "Keep the change, kid," I said. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. I could see the commotion in the window of the restaurant. I saw security guards moving toward the table. This was just the beginning. They thought this was about a dinner. They had no idea. This was about a decade of disrespect. And tomorrow morning, when they showed up at my house to scream and threaten, they would find out that the old man in the cheap suit had teeth. And he was done biting his tongue. The drive home was silent, but my mind was loud. I was calculating. I was strategizing. For years I had played the role of the grieving widower, the passive father. I had let them walk all over me because I thought that was what keeping the peace meant. I thought that was what Catherine would have wanted. But I was wrong. Catherine hated bullies, and she hated leeches. I pulled into the driveway of my estate. The house was dark. It was too big for one man. A Gothic revival mansion that sat on 4 acres of prime real estate. The paint was peeling slightly on the north side, and the gardens were overgrown because I had fired the landscapers to save money. Money I had then given to Bradley. I parked the truck. I walked up the stone steps. Tomorrow, they would come. They would come for the house. They would come for the rest of the money. They would try to declare me senile. They would try to take everything. Let them come. I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped into the foyer. I didn't turn on the lights immediately. I stood in the darkness, letting my eyes adjust. I walked to the study and opened the safe hidden behind the portrait of my wife. I didn't take out money. I took out a phone. A burner phone I kept for emergencies. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It rang twice. "Blackwood Law, Mr. Blackwood speaking." A voice answered, sharp and alert despite the late hour. "Arthur." "It is Lawrence," I said. There was a pause on the other end, then a low chuckle. "Lawrence Sterling. To what do I owe the pleasure? I haven't heard that tone in your voice since the hostile takeover in '98. I looked at the empty room around me. "Wake up the associates, Arthur. I want to activate the Eagle Protocol." "Eagle Protocol." Arthur repeated, his voice losing all humor. "Lawrence, that is the scorched earth option. That is for total liquidation. That is for war." "Are you sure?" I thought about the sneer on my son's face. I thought about the way Vanessa looked at my suit. I thought about the $8,000 bill. "I have never been more sure," I said. I hung up the phone. The war had started, and I was going to win. The sun had barely breached the horizon, washing the gras stone of my driveway in a cold, pale light when I heard the aggressive crunch of tires on gravel. I was sitting in my favorite leather armchair in the library, a cup of black coffee steaming in my hand. I had not slept. Sleep is a luxury for men with clear consciences, or men with no enemies, and as of last night, I fell into neither category. I watched through the sheer curtains as Bradley's silver BMW skid to a halt, blocking my old truck. He parked with the entitlement of a man who believes he owns the pavement beneath his wheels. I took a slow sip of coffee. It was bitter just the way I liked it. I did not get up to open the door. They still had keys I had given them years ago in case of an emergency. I had foolishly hoped those keys would be used for surprise visits or Sunday dinners. Instead, they were being used for an invasion. The front door flew open with a violence that shook the crystal vase in the foyer. There were no hellos, no good mornings, no concern for the father they had not seen since I walked out of Legrand, leaving them to wash dishes. "You have lost your mind, old man." Bradley's voice echoed through the high ceilings of the house. He stormed into the library, his face blotchy and pale, the telltale signs of a hangover mixed with pure, unadulterated rage. He was wearing the same suit from last night, but now it was rumpled, the tie missing the top button undone. He looked like a man who had spent the night in a police station, or begging for money. Vanessa followed him. She was immaculate. Her hair was pulled back so tight it pulled at the corners of her eyes, giving her a reptilian gaze. She did not look angry. She looked focused. She looked like a butcher evaluating a carcass. I stayed seated, my hands wrapped around the warm ceramic mug. I did not offer them a seat. "Do you have any idea what you did to us?" Bradley shouted, marching up to my chair and looming over me. He tried to look intimidating, but I remembered changing his diapers. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike. I saw only a frightened boy playing dress-up in a man's anger. I assume I saved myself $8,000. I said, my voice calm and low. "You humiliated us," Bradley spat. He began pacing the room, kicking at the edge of the antique Persian rug my wife Catherine had brought back from Istanbul. The manager threatened to call the police, Dad. The police. We had to call Richard's business partner at 1 a.m. to wire us funds. Do you know how embarrassing that is? Do you know how that makes me look? It makes you look like a man who cannot pay for his own dinner, I observed. That is not the point, he screamed, his voice cracking. You set us up. You let us order and then you pulled the rug out. You are senile. That is the only explanation. You are losing your grip on reality. I set the coffee cup down on the side table with a deliberate click. Let us talk about reality. Bradley, I said. The reality is that for 10 years I have deposited $15,000 into your account on the 1st of every month. $15,000. That is more than most people earn in 3 months of hard labor. That is nothing, Bradley interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. That is a stipend, Dad. It is a drop in the bucket compared to what you have. And it barely covers our overhead. Do you know what private school costs for Leo? Do you know what the mortgage on our condo is? The mortgage I paid the down payment for, I reminded him. The private school I pay the tuition for directly to the bursar, so you do not spend it on gambling. The $15,000 is for your living expenses, and yet you cannot buy a steak dinner without my credit card. You do not understand how the world works anymore, Bradley sneered. You live in this dusty old mausoleum driving a truck from the Stone Age. You do not understand that in my line of work, image is everything. I have to project success to attract success. When you cut that card, you cut my legs off. You sabotaged my career. I looked at him. There was no career. There was only a title I had invented at a subsidiary company to keep him off the streets. He was a vice president of nothing, in charge of nobody. I am the victim here. Dad Bradley continued, his voice dropping to a whine that was even more pathetic than his shouting. You hurt me. You hurt your own son just to prove a point. What kind of father does that? Vanessa stepped forward then. She placed a hand on Bradley's chest, silencing him. She was the dangerous one. Bradley was noise. Vanessa was strategy. Enough of the history lesson, she said, her voice sharp and cold like cracking ice. We are not here to argue about credit cards, Lawrence. We are here because we are concerned. Concerned, I repeated. Yes, concerned about your capacity to manage your affairs. She walked around the room, running a finger along the dust on the bookshelves. She looked at the peeling paint in the corner of the ceiling. Look at this place, she said with a sneer. It is falling apart. Just like you are 73 years old, Lawrence. You are living alone in a $4 million estate that is rotting around you. You are forgetting things. You are having outbursts like last night. It is not safe. I am perfectly safe, Vanessa. No, you are not, she countered, turning to face me. And we cannot let you jeopardize the family legacy because you are too stubborn to admit you need help. We have a solution. I waited. I knew this was coming. The preamble was over. Now came the demand. We have an opportunity, she said, her eyes locking onto mine. My parents, Richard and Pamela, have a development project, a foolproof investment. But they need liquidity and they need collateral. And let me guess, I said, I am the collateral. You are family, she said, as if the word tasted bad in her mouth. We need you to sign over the deed to this house. Today. I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. You want me to give you my house? We want you to transfer the title to Bradley, she corrected. We will use it to secure the loan for the project. In exchange, we will move you into a facility. A very nice one. Assisted living. You will have meals prepared. You will have nurses. You will not have to worry about this big empty house anymore. It is the best thing for everyone. And if I refuse? Vanessa smiled, but it was a smile that promised pain. If you refuse Lawrence, then we will have to make some difficult decisions regarding Leo. My grandson. The only innocent thing in this entire wretched equation. The boy I had not been allowed to see in 3 months because they were always too busy. What does Leo have to do with this? Everything she said. Leo is a sensitive boy. He needs stability. He needs to be around family that is mentally sound. If you are not willing to help us secure his future, then we cannot in good conscience allow him to be around you. You will never see him again, Lawrence. No visits, no holidays, no birthdays. You will die alone in this house, and Leo will grow up forgetting you ever existed. Bradley looked down at the floor, shifting his weight. Even he seemed uncomfortable with this level of cruelty, but he did not speak up. He did not defend me. He stood there and let his wife use his son as a weapon to extort his father. I looked at Vanessa. I looked at the diamond ring on her finger, a ring I had paid for. I looked at the designer bag on her shoulder, paid for with my dividends. You are blackmailing me, I stated. We are negotiating, she replied. This is business, Lawrence. You taught Bradley that business is about leverage. Well, we have the leverage now. We have the future. You only have the past. I stood up slowly. My joints popped. I walked over to the window and looked out at the overgrown garden Catherine had loved so much. I needed them to think they had won. I needed them to think I was cornered. How much I asked, keeping my back to them. What do you mean, how much? Bradley asked. How much is this project of yours? We need 500,000 liquid cash to buy in, Vanessa said quickly, her greed making her speak faster. Plus the deed to the house for the bank loan. I turned around. I let my shoulders slump. I let my face sag. I summoned every ounce of weariness I felt in my soul and put it on display. I cannot give you the house today, I said, my voice trembling slightly. It takes time. The lawyers. The paperwork. We have the papers, Vanessa said, pulling a thick envelope from her oversized bag. We had them drawn up this morning. A quitclaim deed. All you have to do is sign. I looked at the envelope. It was thick, heavy. It was a death warrant for my independence. I need a day, I said. Just one day. To say goodbye to the house, to process this. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. She was suspicious, but she was also arrogant. She thought she had broken me. Tomorrow, she said. We will come back tomorrow at noon. If the papers are not signed, Lawrence, I promise you the only way you will see Leo is in photographs. And we will start the proceedings to have you declared incompetent. We will drag you through the courts until you have nothing left to spend on lawyers. We are doing this for you, Dad, Bradley added, finding his courage again now that he thought the battle was won. You will be happier in a home. You won't have to worry about bills. Get out, I whispered. What? Vanessa asked sharp. I said get out. Come back tomorrow at noon. But get out of my house now. They exchanged a look of victory. They thought the old lion had finally lost his teeth. Fine, Vanessa said, smoothing her skirt. Noon. Don't make us wait, Lawrence. You know how much I hate waiting. They turned and walked out. I watched them go. I watched them get into the BMW. I watched them drive away, believing they had just pulled off the heist of the century. They had no idea that they had just walked into a trap. As soon as the car disappeared down the long driveway, I straightened my back. The trembling in my hands stopped. The weariness in my eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They wanted the house. They wanted the money. They wanted to erase me. I walked to the heavy oak desk in the corner of the library. I sat down and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I picked up my fountain pen. They thought I was negotiating for time to say goodbye. I was negotiating for time to dig their graves. I picked up the burner phone again. I dialed Blackwood. They took the bait, I said when he answered. Good, Arthur replied. The investigators are ready. We have eyes on their accounts. We have eyes on the in-laws. Do you want the preliminary report? Tell me, I said. It is worse than we thought, Lawrence. Bradley isn't just in debt. He is underwater. He owes $500,000 to a syndicate operating out of New Jersey. The project Vanessa talked about. It doesn't exist. They need the cash to pay off a loan shark before they break your son's legs. I closed my eyes. It was not a business deal. It was a ransom payment. And the in-laws, I asked. Richard and Pamela filed for bankruptcy protection 2 years ago in a different state under a shell company, Arthur said. They have been living on credit cards and floating checks. They are destitute, Lawrence. They have been funding their lifestyle by draining Bradley, who has been draining you. They are parasites. I looked at the empty spot on the rug where Bradley had stood. My son. My only son. He wasn't a businessman. He was a mule for leeches. Bring everything to the basement, I said. I want the full files. I want the photos, the bank statements, the bankruptcy filings. I want it all. Tonight, Arthur asked. Tonight, I confirmed. Tomorrow at noon, they are coming for a signing ceremony. I want to make sure I have the right documents prepared for them. I hung up the phone. The silence of the house returned, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt charged. It felt like the air before a thunderstorm. I stood up and walked to the fireplace. I looked at the painting of Catherine above the mantel. Her eyes were kind, but her jaw was set. She was a woman who did not suffer fools. I am sorry, Catherine, I whispered. I tried to protect him. I tried to give him the life we never had. But you cannot save someone who is determined to drown. I touched the frame of the painting. Tomorrow I would not just be signing papers. I would be signing the end of my life as a father and the beginning of my life as a judge. And the sentence I was about to hand down would be life without parole. The sound of the heavy front door latching shut echoed through the foyer like a gavel striking a sounding block. I stood there for a moment in the silence of the hallway, listening to the fading hum of the BMW's engine as it retreated down the long driveway. My shoulders, which had slumped with the weight of a weary old father, straightened. The tremor in my hands, a carefully practiced affectation for their benefit, vanished instantly. My spine realigned, and the shuffle in my step was replaced by the confident stride of a man who had once negotiated shipping lanes with heads of state. I walked to the grandfather clock that stood sentinel at the end of the hall. It was an antique, a piece from the 18th century that Catherine had loved, but it was also a deception, much like the rest of my life. I reached behind the face of the clock and pressed my thumb against a hidden biometric scanner. A soft beep was followed by the mechanical whir of hydraulic hinges. The wall panel beside the clock slid back, revealing a steel elevator door. I stepped inside. The air in the house was stale, smelling of old wood and the cheap perfume Vanessa had left in her wake, but the air in the elevator was scrubbed clean, filtered, and cool. I pressed the single button and descended. This was my sanctuary. This was where Lawrence, the retired widower, ended, and Lawrence Sterling, the majority shareholder of Sterling Logistics, began. The doors opened into a space that would have made the Pentagon jealous. Walls of monitors hummed with data. Servers blinked in the darkness. In the center of the room sat a glass desk, devoid of clutter. Arthur Blackwood was already there, not in person, but on the main screen, his face larger than life, high definition, and grim. He did not look like a lawyer in that moment. He looked like a coroner ready to deliver a particularly gruesome cause of death. I walked to the desk and sat down in the ergonomic chair that cost more than my truck. I placed the burner phone on the glass surface. "Report," I said. My voice was no longer the gravelly whisper of a grandfather. It was the voice that had commanded fleets. Arthur adjusted his glasses. He looked down at a tablet in his hands, then up at me. "It is an autopsy, Lawrence," he said. "A financial autopsy of a living patient. We ran the deep dive you requested. The Eagle Protocol stripped them bare. Do you want the sun or the parasites first?" "My son," I said. "Let us get the pain over with." Arthur tapped his screen and data flooded the monitors surrounding me. Bank statements, credit card logs, casino records, and loan documents cascaded like a digital waterfall. "Bradley is not just broke," Arthur said, his voice clinical. "He is compromised. The job you gave him, the vice presidency at the subsidiary, he stopped showing up 6 months ago. He has been falsifying timesheets and expense reports to keep the salary flowing. But that $15,000 a month you give him, it is gone within 48 hours of the deposit." "Where does it go?" I asked, though the sinking feeling in my gut already knew the answer. "Gambling," Arthur said, "but not the legal kind. He is banned from most casinos in Atlantic City and Vegas for outstanding markers. He moved to the underground circuit. Sports betting online poker rooms hosted in offshore jurisdictions. He is chasing losses, Lawrence. The deeper he gets, the bigger he bets trying to win back the hole he dug." I looked at the numbers. Withdrawals of $5,000, $10,000, $20,000. He owes $540,000 to a private lending entity operating out of Newark. Arthur continued, "They are not a bank. They are the kind of people who collect with baseball bats. The deadline for the VIG, the interest payment, is this Friday. If he does not pay, they hurt him. That is why they are so desperate for the house. They need to liquidate it immediately to save his kneecaps." I stared at the screen at the face of my son, captured in a surveillance photo, entering a shady club in Jersey at 3 in the morning. He looked terrified. He looked sweaty. He looked nothing like the boy I had taught to fish. "He never came to me," I whispered. "He never asked for help. He just tried to steal it." "He is ashamed," Arthur said. "And he is terrified of Vanessa. She is the one pushing him. She knows about the debt. Show me the in-laws," I said, hardening my heart. The screens changed. Now the faces of Richard and Pamela filled the room. They looked respectable in their photos, smiling at galas, holding glasses of champagne. But the numbers next to them told a different story. "Richard and Pamela are artists," Arthur said with a sneer. "Scam artists. They ran a boutique investment firm for a decade. Prestige Capital. It was a classic Ponzi scheme. They took money from new investors to pay returns to the old ones while skimming off the top to fund their lifestyle. The cars, the jewelry, the first-class travel, it was all stolen money. And now I asked. The well ran dry 2 years ago. The new investors stopped coming. They quietly filed for bankruptcy in Nevada, using a shell corporation to hide their personal assets, but they botched it. They are currently under investigation by the SEC, although no indictment has been unsealed yet. They are living on fumes, Lawrence. They have maxed out 14 credit cards. They have second mortgages on properties they don't even own anymore. They view you as their golden parachute." I leaned back in the chair. It all made sense. The pressure to sell the house. The move to the assisted living facility. They needed to strip mine my assets to fill the black hole of their own failures. They were not just greedy. They were drowning, and they were willing to use my body as a raft. "They think I am feeble," I said. "They think I am a confused old man sitting on a pile of gold I don't understand." "That is their mistake," Arthur said. "But Lawrence, we have to talk about why." I looked at him sharply. Why what? Why you let it get this far, Arthur said, his voice softening slightly. You knew Bradley was weak. You knew he wasn't cut out for the business. But you gave him the allowance. You gave him the credit card. You let him play the big shot. Why did you hide the truth from him? Why did you live like a pauper while sitting on a fortune? I stood up and walked away from the screens. I walked to the far wall of the basement where a single spotlight illuminated a painting. It was not a masterpiece by a famous artist. It was a portrait of Catherine painted a month before she died. She looked pale, but her eyes were fierce. I touched the cold glass of the frame. Because I promised her, I said, my voice trembling. Arthur remained silent, waiting. He knew the history, but he needed me to say it. He needed me to remember the logic behind the masquerade. Catherine saw it, I said. She saw the rot in him before I did. When Bradley was 20, he crashed his car, a brand new convertible I had bought him. He walked away without a scratch, and the first thing he asked was when I would buy him a new one. He didn't ask if the other driver was okay. He didn't say sorry. He just demanded more. I turned back to look at Arthur. Catherine made me swear. She said, Lawrence, if you give him everything, he will be nothing. If he knows how much we really have, he will never work a day in his life. He will wait for us to die. She wanted him to struggle, Arthur. She wanted him to build character. So we hid it. We moved to the estate, but we lived simply. We told him the business was struggling when it was thriving. We told him the market was down when we were making record profits. And after she died, Arthur prompted. After she died, I couldn't bear to see him struggle, I admitted. I was lonely. I missed her. And he was the only piece of her I had left. So I started the allowance. I paid the tuition for Leo. I gave him the card. I thought I was helping. I thought if I took the pressure off, he would find his way. I looked at the screens again, at the red numbers of debt and fraud. But I didn't help him, I said. I crippled him. I fed the cancer. I let him believe that money was magic, that it appeared whenever he whined. And now he has married a woman who smells that weakness and feeds on it. So what is the play, Lawrence? Arthur asked. Do we bail him out? Do we pay off the syndicate? It is pocket change for you. 500,000. You make that in a week of interest. I thought about it. I could write a check. I could make the bad men go away. I could save his kneecaps. I could save his reputation. I could let him go back to his life of delusion. But then I remembered the dinner. I remembered the laughter when the waiter brought the bill. I remembered Vanessa using my grandson as a bargaining chip. I remembered the look in Bradley's eyes when he demanded my house. It wasn't love. It wasn't even desperation. It was entitlement. If I save him now, I said slowly, he will never learn. He will wait for the next bailout. And when I am gone, he will burn through the inheritance in a year and end up in a ditch. I walked back to the desk. I looked at Arthur. No bailouts. Arthur nodded. Then what? We execute the plan, I said. Tomorrow at noon they are coming to sign the papers. They think they are signing a quitclaim deed to transfer the house. And what will they be signing? Arthur asked, a small smile playing on his lips. They will be signing a confession, I said. But before that, I want to have a little fun. I want to show them exactly who they are dealing with. I pulled a file from the drawer. It contained the original deed to the house, the trust documents for Leo, and the full accounting of my net worth. Arthur, I want you to prepare a document, a transfer of liability. Liability? Arthur asked, intrigued. Yes. I want to buy the debt. Arthur paused. You want to buy Bradley's debt from the syndicate. I want to buy the note I corrected. I want to become the creditor. I want to be the one holding the hammer. Contact the organization in Jersey. Offer them 100 cents on the dollar plus a 20% premium for the immediate transfer of the loan note to a holding company of my choosing. They will take it. They don't want to break legs, they want money. It will be done, Arthur said, typing furiously. And the in-laws. And buy their debt too, I said. The second mortgages, the credit cards. Buy it all. I want to own every cent they owe. By tomorrow noon, I want to be the only person in the world they answer to. That is aggressive, Lawrence, Arthur said. It is biblical. It is parenting, I said. I looked at the screen one last time. They want a signing ceremony. They will get one. But they aren't getting the house. They are getting a masterclass in consequences. I turned off the screens. The room plunged into darkness save for the spotlight on Catherine. I am sorry, my love, I whispered to her. I broke my promise. I didn't let him struggle enough. But I am going to fix it. It is going to hurt him. It is going to break him. But it is the only way to save him from himself. I walked back to the elevator. The ascent was slow. When the doors opened back into the hallway, the house was silent and dark. I locked the secret panel behind the clock. I walked to the kitchen and made a fresh pot of coffee. I had a long night ahead of me. I had to set the stage. I had to look the part of the defeated old man one last time. I went to the living room and began to rearrange the furniture. I pulled out old photo albums and scattered them on the table. I wanted it to look like I had spent the night reminiscing, like I was saying goodbye. I took out a bottle of cheap whiskey and poured half of it down the sink, then left the open bottle on the table next to a glass. The smell of alcohol would sell the narrative. The distraught father drinking away his sorrow before surrendering his legacy. They would walk in here tomorrow, seeing a broken man. They would see victory, and that blindness would be their undoing. I sat down in the chair facing the door and waited for the sun. The logic was sound. The trap was set. The emotion I felt wasn't anger anymore. It was a cold, surgical precision. I was about to amputate the rot from my family tree, and I wouldn't even need anesthesia. The grandfather clock chimed 12 times. Each gong vibrated through the floorboards, marking the start of the execution, but they did not know who was on the chopping block. I sat in the armchair, huddled under a moth-eaten blanket, the open bottle of whiskey on the table beside me, perfuming the air with the sharp scent of cheap alcohol and despair. My eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying, but from rubbing them raw to simulate a night of weeping. When the front door opened, they did not knock. They simply walked in, claiming the space as if I were already dead and buried. Bradley entered first, his eyes darting around the room, taking in the disarray, the bottles, the scattered photos. He looked relieved. He saw a broken man. Vanessa followed her heels, clicking on the hardwood floor like the ticking of a bomb. She held a leather folder, the contract that would strip me of my home. "You are ready," she said, not asking, but stating. I looked up at them, letting my lower lip tremble. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small worn bank book. It was a prop I had prepared years ago for a moment I prayed would never come. "I cannot give you the house," I stammered, my voice thin and reedy. "It is all I have left of your mother. But I found this. It is my retirement fund. My emergency savings." I held the book out to Bradley. His hand shook as he took it. He flipped it open, his eyes scanning the final balance. $50,000, he read aloud. Vanessa snatched the book from his hands. She stared at the number, and her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. "50,000, she screeched. "Are you mocking us, Lawrence? We need 500,000 just to stop the bleeding. We need the house. This is tip money." She threw the bank book at me. It hit my chest and fluttered to the floor, landing amidst the scattered photos of her husband's childhood. "It is all I have," I lied, shrinking back into the chair. "Please do not take the house." "You are lying," Vanessa shouted. "You are hoarding it. Old people always hoard money in the walls, in the mattresses. Where is the deed, Lawrence? Where is the safe?" She began to tear the room apart. She pulled books from the shelves, throwing them violently to the ground. She opened drawers and dumped their contents. Then she turned to the display cabinet in the corner, the cabinet where Catherine kept her collection of porcelain figurines, delicate hand-painted angels she had collected for 40 years. "Tell us where the deed is or I start breaking things," she threatened, picking up a porcelain angel. "No," I cried, real panic seizing my chest for a moment. "Not those. Please." Vanessa sneered and dropped the angel. It shattered on the floor, the sound of breaking china echoing like a gunshot. "Oops," she said, deadpan. "Where is the deed, old man?" Bradley stood there watching. He looked uncomfortable, but he did not stop her. He watched his wife destroy his mother's memory and said nothing. I decided it was time for the final test. The test that would determine if there was any humanity left in my son. I gasped loudly, clutching my chest. I let my body slide from the chair to the floor, curling into a fetal position on the rug. I hyperventilated, making my breath come in ragged, wheezing gasps. My chest, I moaned, reaching a trembling hand out toward Bradley. "Son. My pills. In the kitchen. Please." Bradley took a step toward me, instinct kicking in. "Dad!" Vanessa grabbed his arm, jerking him back. "Do not be an idiot, Bradley," she hissed. "He is faking it. Look at him. He is just trying to stall. He wants us to leave so he can hide the papers." "But he looks bad," Bradley said, hesitation in his voice. "He is fine," Vanessa snapped. "Ignore him. Start looking for a wall safe. Check behind the paintings." I lay on the floor, just looking up at them, through slit eyes. I watched my son look at me, gasping for air on the carpet. I watched him weigh his father's life against his wife's anger and his own greed, and I watched him turn away. He turned his back on me. He walked to the fireplace and started pulling the framed photos off the mantel, searching for a hidden latch. He stepped over my legs to get to the bookshelf. He left me to die. In that moment, the last ember of affection I held for him was extinguished. It didn't flicker or fade, it was simply snuffed out. The grief I had felt the night before was gone, replaced by a cold, Arctic clarity. They were not family. They were scavengers picking the meat off a carcass they thought was already dead. I stopped wheezing. I let my breathing even out, though I stayed on the floor. I watched them ransack my home, destroying the sanctuary I had built. I waited until they were on the other side of the room, tearing the cushions off the sofa. Then I slowly stood up. I brushed the dust off my trousers. I picked up the bank book from the floor and put it back in my pocket. "You are looking in the wrong place," I said, my voice steady and strong, filling the room. They both froze. They turned around slowly. They saw the man standing by the fireplace. Not the trembling invalid, but the man who had stared down union strikes and hostile takeovers. "The deed is not behind the paintings," I said, "and the safe is not in the wall." Vanessa looked at me, confused by the sudden change in my demeanor. You are okay," she stammered. "I am better than okay," I said. "I am enlightened." I walked to the door and opened it wide. "If you want the deed, come to the main office of Sterling Logistics tomorrow at 9 a.m. We will sign everything there." "But," Bradley started. "Get out," I roared. They scrambled. They grabbed their bags and ran past me, terrified by the sudden shift in power. They didn't understand what had happened. They thought I was having a mood swing. They didn't realize they had just failed the final exam. As the door slammed shut behind them, I walked to the pile of shattered porcelain. I picked up a fragment of an angel's wing. "I am sorry, Catherine," I whispered, "but I had to know." I went to the kitchen and poured the rest of the whiskey down the sink. I didn't need props anymore. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. I would not be signing a quitclaim deed. I would be signing their eviction from my life. And unlike them, I would not miss. 3 days after I threw my son and his wife out of my library, I made the tactical error of leaving the estate for 2 hours. I had an appointment with my cardiologist, not because I was actually dying, as I had feigned on the rug, but because a man of my age needs to maintain the machinery if he intends to fight a war. When I returned, the rusted iron gates at the end of the driveway were open. Not just unlocked, but wide open, gaping like a mouth waiting to be fed. I drove my truck up the gravel path, the tires crunching on the stones that Catherine and I had hand-selected 40 years ago. As the house came into view, my stomach turned. It wasn't anxiety. It was the cold, heavy realization of invasion. A moving truck was parked on the lawn, not in the driveway, but on the grass. The tire tracks cut deep ruts into the turf I had spent decades cultivating. Beside the truck sat Richard's convertible and a red sports car I didn't recognize, presumably Pamela's latest midlife crisis purchase. I parked and walked up the steps. My key did not work. The lock had not just been changed, it had been drilled out and replaced with a shiny gold electronic keypad that looked gaudy against the ancient oak. I rang the bell of my own home. The door opened and there stood Vanessa. She was not wearing the aggressive power suit from 3 days ago. She was wearing an apron. My wife's apron. "You are back," she said, her tone entirely too cheerful. "We were getting worried, Lawrence. We thought you might have wandered off." I looked past her. The foyer was full of boxes. "What is this?" I asked, my voice low. "This is the solution," she said, stepping aside to let me in, as if she were the hostess and I the guest. "Since you had that episode the other night, Bradley and I realized we could not leave you alone. But we also know you are stubborn about the nursing home. So we compromised." She gestured grandly to the living room. "My parents have graciously agreed to move in. They will be your full-time caretakers. 24/7 supervision, Lawrence. You will never be alone again." I walked into the living room. Richard was lying on my leather Chesterfield sofa, his shoes still on his feet, resting on the armrest. He was holding a glass of my 30-year-old scotch, the bottle sitting uncorked on the coffee table beside a half-eaten sandwich. "Welcome home, roommate," Richard boomed, raising the glass. "Don't worry about thanking us. Family helps family, right?" I looked at the chaos. They had moved my furniture to make room for their gaudy statues and modern art pieces. They had colonized my sanctuary. "Get out," I said, but the words lacked the fire of the previous encounter. I was outnumbered, and they knew it. Now, Larry Pamela's voice drifted down from the second floor. She appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing a silk kimono. "Don't be difficult. We are doing you a favor. We gave up our condo to be here." They didn't give up anything. They had been evicted. Arthur's report had confirmed it that morning. They were homeless refugees disguising their desperation as charity. I realized then that shouting would do no good. Calling the police would result in them showing the officers my medical episode and claiming they were protecting a senile old man. They had dug in like ticks. To remove them, I would need more than tweezers. I would need fire. So I did the only thing a strategist could do. I surrendered, or at least I let them believe I had. "Fine," I said, letting my shoulders slump, letting the tremors return to my hands. "Fine. Just leave me my room." "We moved you to the guest room downstairs," Vanessa said brightly. "The master bedroom has the best light, and Mom and Dad need the space. Plus, stairs are dangerous for you." They had taken my bed. They had taken the room where I used to read poetry to Catherine. I nodded, looking at the floor. I pretended to be broken. I pretended to be the feeble old man they needed me to be. "Thank you," I whispered. The next week was a masterclass in humiliation. I became a ghost in my own home, a servant to the parasites feasting on the carcass of my life. I woke up early to make coffee, which Richard would complain was too weak or too strong, depending on his mood. I washed the dishes they left in the sink because the maid service had quit after Pamela screamed at them for stealing silver that she had actually pawned herself. I watched them consume. That is the only word for it. They consumed my food, my electricity, my space. But their cruelty was not just in their consumption. It was in their pettiness. It was in the small, unnecessary acts of dominance designed to strip away my dignity layer by layer. On Tuesday morning, I walked into the downstairs bathroom, the small, cramped space they had relegated me to. Richard was there, the door wide open. He was sitting on the edge of the tub, one of his Italian loafers in his hand. He was scrubbing a scuff mark on the leather. I froze. In his hand was a blue toothbrush. My toothbrush. He looked up, saw me, and didn't even pause. "Oh, good morning, Larry," he said, scrubbing vigorously. "Got a bit of mud on the Gucci. Damn gardeners you hired don't sweep the paths properly." He dipped my toothbrush into the sink, then went back to the shoe, the bristles turning gray with street grime. "That is my toothbrush," I said. "Is it?" Richard asked, feigning surprise. He looked at it, then shrugged. "Well, you should get a new one anyway. At your age, gum disease is a silent killer. Besides, this one was too soft. Didn't get the grit out." He tossed the toothbrush into the trash can with a wet thud. "Be a pal and grab me a towel," he said. I stood there, my fists clenching at my sides. I wanted to grab him by his silk collar and throw him through the window. I wanted to tell him that I owned the building his defunct investment firm used to rent. But I did nothing. I breathed in. I breathed out. I handed him a towel. Because every insult was fuel, every humiliation was a deposit in the bank of my resolve. But the toothbrush was nothing compared to what happened on Thursday. I had been out meeting secretly with Arthur in the back of a diner 3 towns over, signing the paperwork to acquire the debt note from the New Jersey syndicate. When I returned, I heard laughter coming from the master bedroom upstairs. I walked up the stairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. The door was open. Pamela and Vanessa were in the walk-in closet. Catherine's closet. I had kept it exactly as she left it. Her dresses hung in color-coded rows protected by plastic covers. Her shoes were lined up on the shelves. The air in there still smelled faintly of her lavender sachets. But now the floor was covered in piles of fabric. Pamela was holding up a vintage Chanel evening gown, a dress Catherine had worn to the opera in Vienna for our 30th anniversary. It was a masterpiece of black silk and lace. "Look at this rag," Pamela cackled. "It smells like mothballs and depression. Who wears this garbage?" "It is vintage, Mom," Vanessa said, giggling. "You could sell it to a costume shop, or use it as a dust rag." Pamela threw the dress onto a pile of others on the floor. A pile she was kicking toward the door. "We need to clear this out," she said. "I need space for my winter coats. And these shoes, good Lord. Did she have club feet? They are hideous." She picked up a pair of red pumps, Catherine's favorite dancing shoes. She tossed them over her shoulder, and they hit the wall with a dull thud. I stepped into the room. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Pamela jumped, pressing a hand to her chest. "Jesus, Larry. Do not sneak up on people like that. We are decluttering. This place is a mausoleum. You cannot hoard dead people's clothes forever. It is morbid. And frankly, it is unsanitary." "Put them back," I said. "Excuse me." Vanessa stepped forward, blocking my path to her mother. I said, "Put them back." "Those are Catherine's." "They are trash, Lawrence," Vanessa spat. "And this is my mother's room now. She needs the space. We are doing you a favor. We are bagging them up for goodwill, although I doubt they will even take them." Pamela kicked the pile again. "Honestly, Larry, you should thank us. We are updating the energy of the house. It feels heavy. Sad. We are bringing in light." She reached for a silk scarf, a blue Hermes that I had bought Catherine in Paris. "Do not touch that," I roared. For a second, the old lion resurfaced. My voice shook the walls. Pamela dropped the scarf. Vanessa took a step back, surprised by the sudden aggression. But then I saw the look in Vanessa's eyes. It was calculating. She was waiting for me to lose control. She wanted me to raise a hand. She wanted a reason to call the doctors. I forced the lion back into the cage. I swallowed the rage until it tasted like bile. "Please," I said, dropping my eyes. "Just put them in boxes. I will move them to the basement. Please do not throw them away." Vanessa smirked. She had won. "Fine," she said, "but get them out of here by tonight, or they go to the curb." I spent the next 6 hours carrying boxes down to the basement. I folded every dress. I wrapped every shoe. I apologized to Catherine with every step. I told her I was sorry for letting these harpies touch her things. I told her it was necessary. Because while I was moving boxes, I was also moving something else. Hidden inside the boxes of winter clothes I brought up from the basement were tiny black devices, high-definition cameras with audio recording capabilities, the size of a button. While they sat in the dining room eating a roast I had cooked, drinking my wine, and laughing about my senility, I was at work. I asked if I could dust the high shelves in the living room because I wanted to be useful. I installed a camera in the molding of the crown ceiling, aimed directly at the sofa where Richard held court. I fixed the smoke detector in the hallway that had been chirping. I replaced the battery and added a microphone. I told them the Wi-Fi in the kitchen was spotty and installed a range extender that doubled as a wide-angle lens covering the entire room. I played the part of the submissive servant perfectly. I shuffled. I mumbled. I let them insult me. "Oh, look at him," Pamela said, as I swept the floor around her feet. "He is like a little Roomba, but slower." Richard laughed, kicking his feet up so I could sweep under them. "Careful. Larry, don't throw your back out. We need you to clean the gutters tomorrow." I swept the dirt. I took the abuse. And I smiled internally. Because they were comfortable now. They felt safe. They felt like the kings and queens of the castle. And when people feel safe, they get careless. They start to talk. They start to reveal the darkness they keep hidden in the corners of their souls. I spent 3 days installing the network. By Friday night, every room in the house except the bathrooms was wired. The feed went directly to the servers in the basement, servers they didn't even know existed behind the grandfather clock. I was not just a victim anymore. I was the warden of a prison they didn't know they were in. That Friday night I retreated to my small room in the basement, ostensibly to sleep. But I did not sleep. I put on my headphones and I watched the monitors. I watched them celebrate. They sat in my living room drinking my cognac. "We did it," Richard said, raising a glass. "The old fool is broken. He is basically our butler. And the house is as good as ours," Vanessa added. "I talked to the lawyer today. With the documentation of his erratic behavior and the fact that we are living here caring for him, we can file for conservatorship next month. Once we have that, we can sign the deed ourselves." "What about the debt?" Bradley asked, his voice nervous. He was sitting on the edge of the sofa, looking pale. The syndicate called again. "They want the money by Monday, or they start adding points." "Relax," Richard said. "Once we control the accounts, we can wire them whatever they want. Larry has millions stashed away. We just have to find the account numbers." I watched them plan my demise. I watched them carve up my life. But then the conversation shifted, and it turned darker than I had anticipated. "He is taking too long, though," Pamela complained, pouring herself another drink. "Next month is too far away. We need the cash now. Maybe we speed it up." Richard suggested, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "How?" Bradley asked. "He is old," Richard said, shrugging. "Old men have accidents. They fall downstairs. They take the wrong pills." I zoomed in on the camera. The resolution was crystal clear. I could see the sweat on Bradley's forehead. "You mean—" "Kill him," Bradley whispered. "Not kill," Vanessa corrected quickly. Just accelerate nature. He takes heart medication, right? High blood pressure. Yes, Bradley said. And what happens if he takes too much? Richard asked. Or if he takes something that interacts with it? Like amphetamines or adrenaline. It would look like a stroke, a heart attack, natural causes. No one would question it, Pamela added. He is 73. He has been under stress. It is a tragedy waiting to happen. Bradley looked at his wife. He looked at his in-laws. He looked at the life of luxury they were promising him. I waited for him to say no. I waited for him to stand up and say that was his father they were talking about. Do you know where the pills are? Bradley asked, his voice barely audible. I took off the headphones. I sat in the darkness of the basement, the silence ringing in my ears. My son. My flesh and blood. He hadn't just agreed to rob me. He was considering murder. The sadness I expected to feel didn't come. Instead, I felt a cold clarity, a finality. I looked at the screen again. I hit the save button. The file was named Evidence, but in my mind I named it The End. I had let the parasites in. I had let them feed. I had let them get fat and comfortable. And now I had them exactly where I wanted them. They were planning a funeral. They didn't realize it was their own. I picked up the phone and texted Arthur. It is done. Prepare the papers. And call the police, but tell them to wait. I want a heavy police presence, but not for me. The invasion was over. The occupation was about to end. And the liberation would be televised, or at least recorded in high definition for the jury. The glow of the monitors was the only light in the room, painting my face in shades of cool blue and gray. The hum of the server banks behind me was a steady, rhythmic drone, a mechanical heartbeat that seemed louder than my own. I sat in the ergonomic chair, my hands clasped tightly together, resting on the glass desk, watching the digital feed from the living room upstairs. It was a strange dissociation, like watching a movie where you know the ending is going to be tragic, but you cannot look away. On screen 3, the camera hidden in the crown molding captured the scene in high definition. Richard was pouring another glass of my 30-year-old Macallan. He held the crystal tumbler up to the light, admiring the amber liquid that he had not earned, that he did not deserve. Pamela was flipping through a magazine, her feet resting on the coffee table, right on top of a book of poetry Catherine had loved. Vanessa was pacing her phone in her hand, checking the time, checking her messages, always calculating, always scheming. And then there was Bradley, my son. He sat on the edge of the sofa, his head in his hands. He looked small. He looked defeated. For a fleeting second, a foolish, sentimental part of my brain wanted to reach through the screen and comfort him. I wanted to tell him it would be all right, that I could fix this, that I could pay off the bad men in Jersey, and we could start over. But then Richard spoke, and that foolish part of my brain was silenced forever. The audio feed was crisp, picked up by the microphone I had installed inside the smoke detector. He is like a cockroach, Richard said, taking a sip of the scotch. You stomp on him, you spray him, and he just keeps scurrying around. This morning he was singing in the kitchen. Singing. Who sings when they have lost everything? He is senile, Dad, Vanessa snapped. He probably forgot he lost the house. He probably thinks it is 1985. Or maybe he is just resilient, Pamela suggested, lazily turning a page. Some of these old-timers are built tough. He might live another 10 years. Can we wait 10 years, Bradley? The camera zoomed in on Bradley. He lifted his head. His eyes were bloodshot. No, he whispered. We cannot wait 10 days. The syndicate called again. They know where Leo goes to school. Vanessa stopped pacing. She turned on him like a viper. You did not tell me that, she hissed. I didn't want to worry you, Bradley said, his voice trembling. But they said if the money isn't there by the end of the month, they are going to take it out in trade. They mentioned fingers. The room went silent. I watched them process this. I watched the fear ripple through them. But it wasn't fear for me. It wasn't fear for their souls. It was fear for their comfort. Then we have no choice, Richard said, setting his glass down. We have to accelerate the timeline. How? Vanessa asked. We already have the lawyer drawing up the competency papers. We have the fake medical history. What else can we do? Richard leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that the microphone amplified perfectly. We help nature along, he said. I leaned closer to the monitor, my breath catching in my throat. I knew they were greedy. I knew they were amoral. But surely there was a line. Surely there was a boundary they would not cross. Your father has high blood pressure, right, Bradley? Richard asked. He takes those little blue pills every morning. Lisinopril. Yes, Bradley said. And he has a heart condition. Mild arrhythmia. Yes. Richard smiled, and it was the most hideous thing I had ever seen. Well, what happens if his blood pressure medication gets mixed up? What happens if instead of lowering his pressure, he takes something that spikes it, something that sends his heart into overdrive? Like, say, a high dose of caffeine pills crushed up. Or maybe some of those diet pills Pamela uses, the ones with the ephedrine. Pamela sat up, interested. I have a whole bottle in my bag, she said. They make my heart race if I take 2. Imagine what 10 would do to a 70-year-old man. He would have a stroke, Vanessa said, her eyes widening, not with horror, but with realization. Or a heart attack. Exactly, Richard said, leaning back, looking satisfied with his own brilliance. And who would question it? He is old. He is under stress. He has a history of heart issues. The coroner would take one look at him, sign the certificate as natural causes, and move on. And then Vanessa added, her voice picking up speed, the estate transfers to Bradley immediately. No probate battles. No waiting for competency hearings. We pay off the syndicate. We sell the house. We are free. I sat in the basement, frozen. My blood ran cold, literally cold, as if my body was rejecting the heat of life in response to what I was hearing. They were discussing my murder. They were planning it with the same casual tone one might use to plan a grocery run or a vacation. I looked at Bradley. This was the moment. This was the turning point. I waited for him to stand up. I waited for him to shout. I waited for him to punch Richard in the face and throw them all out. I waited for the son I had raised, the boy who used to cry when we found a dead bird in the yard, to show himself. Bradley looked at his hands. He looked at his wife. He looked at the debt that was crushing him. Will it hurt? He asked softly. I closed my eyes. The pain of that question was worse than any physical blow I had ever taken. He didn't ask if it was wrong. He didn't say no. He just asked if it would hurt. As if a painless murder was somehow acceptable. As if killing his father was fine as long as I didn't scream too loud. It will be quick, Richard assured him, lying through his teeth. Like falling asleep. His heart will just stop. Pop. And then all your problems are gone, son. You will be the man of the house. You will have saved your family. Saved his family. The irony was so thick it choked me. He was destroying his family to save his skin. Bradley took a deep breath. He looked at the ceiling, almost looking directly into the hidden camera, though he didn't know it. Do it, he whispered. But I don't want to know when. Just handle it. The screen blurred. I realized I was crying. Silent, hot tears tracking down my cheeks. I hadn't cried since Catherine died. I hadn't cried when they humiliated me at the restaurant. I hadn't cried when they took my room. But I cried now. I cried for the death of my son. Not his physical death, but the death of his soul. The boy I knew was gone. He had been consumed by greed and fear and weakness. In his place sat a man who would authorize the murder of the person who gave him life, just to avoid the consequences of his own actions. I wiped my face with a handkerchief. The tears stopped. The sadness evaporated, leaving behind something hard and sharp. A diamond of resolve formed under the immense pressure of betrayal. I reached for the mouse. My hand did not shake. I clicked the save button on the recording software. I backed it up to the secure cloud. I backed it up to an external drive. I made 3 copies. This was it. This was the smoking gun. This was the evidence that would put them away for life. Conspiracy to commit murder. Premeditated. Recorded in high fidelity. I picked up the burner phone. I dialed Arthur. "Did you get it?" He asked, his voice tight. He had been monitoring the feed remotely. "I got it," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Hollow. Dead. "Lawrence, I am so sorry," Arthur said genuinely. "I know you hoped—" "I hoped for a miracle," I interrupted, "but I got a verdict." "What do you want to do?" Arthur asked. "Do we call the police now? We can have them arrested within the hour. They have the intent, they have the means." "No," I said. "Lawrence, they are planning to kill you. It is too dangerous." "They won't do it tonight," I said, analyzing the conversation I had just heard. "Pamela needs to get the pills. They need to find the right moment. They will wait for the party." "The party?" Arthur asked, confused. "They are hosting a gala here on Saturday," I said, "to celebrate the transfer of ownership. They invited their creditors disguised as investors. They want me to sign the papers in front of everyone to make it binding. They plan to kill me after I sign. It is the perfect cover. The excitement, the stress." Poor old Lawrence's heart just gave out. "So we stop them before Saturday," Arthur insisted. "No," I said again firmly. "We let the party happen." "Why, Lawrence? Why risk it?" "Because I want an audience," I said. "Arresting them quietly in the night is too good for them. They care about image. They care about status. They care about what people think. I want to strip them of that before I strip them of their freedom." I looked at the screen one last time. Bradley was pouring himself a drink, his hands shaking. He was drinking to forget what he had just agreed to. "I want them to feel safe," I continued. "I want them to think they have won. I want them to stand in front of their friends and their enemies and think they are the kings of the world. And then I want to drop the guillotine." Arthur was silent for a moment. "It is dangerous, Lawrence. If they decide to move the timeline up—" "I will be ready," I said. "I will switch my own pills. I will watch everything. I won't eat or drink anything they give me. But the party goes ahead." "Okay," Arthur agreed reluctantly. "I will have plainclothes security at the event, and I will have the police on standby just down the road. When you give the signal, we move in." "Good," I said. "And Arthur—" "Yes, Lawrence. Prepare the foreclosure documents," I said, "and the termination of employment for Bradley, and the lawsuit against Richard and Pamela for the fraud against their previous investors. I want to hit them with everything. I want them buried so deep they never see the sun again. Consider it done." I hung up the phone. I looked at the image of my family on the screens. They were laughing now. The tension had broken. They had made the decision, and now they were giddy with the prospect of the money. They were toasting to my death. I turned off the monitors. The room went black. I sat in the darkness for a long time. I said goodbye to Bradley. I said goodbye to the hope that he would ever be a good man. I buried my son in that basement. When I stood up, I was no longer a father. I was an executioner, and I had a job to do. Saturday arrived wrapped in a veneer of expensive perfume and desperate ambition. The estate, which had stood silent and dignified for decades, was transformed into a carnival of excess. Catering trucks blocked the driveway, unloading trays of caviar and crates of champagne that I knew had been purchased on credit I now owned. A string quartet set up on the patio playing Vivaldi to an audience of peacocks. I watched from the window of my small downstairs room as the guests arrived. They were a motley crew of the city's social climbers, fading celebrities, and men in ill-fitting suits who looked more comfortable holding baseball bats than crystal flutes. I recognized a few faces from Arthur's dossier. The man in the pinstripe suit laughing too loudly with Bradley was Vinny the Knuckles Moretti, the syndicate enforcer who held my son's debt. He was here to collect. The woman in the red dress clinging to Richard's arm was a former investor in their Ponzi scheme, likely promised a payout from tonight's proceedings. They were all vultures, circling a kill they hadn't made yet. At 6 o'clock, Vanessa knocked on my door. She didn't wait for an answer. She barged in, holding a garment bag. "Get dressed," she commanded, tossing the bag onto the narrow bed. "The guests are arriving." I opened the bag. Inside was a suit. But it wasn't one of my old suits. It was a costume. A brown polyester suit from the 70s, the kind you'd find in a bargain bin at a thrift store. It was slightly too large, the pants hemmed with safety pins. "What is this?" I asked, holding up the jacket. "It is your outfit," Vanessa said, smirking. "We want you to look the part, Lawrence, the eccentric old uncle, the poor relation we took in out of the kindness of our hearts. It sells the narrative better. If you look like a millionaire, people might ask questions. If you look like a charity case, they will just pity you." She walked over to the mirror and adjusted her diamond necklace, a necklace I had bought for Catherine on our 20th anniversary. "Put it on," she said, "and don't come out until 7. We will call you when it is time for the signing. And Lawrence," she turned her eyes cold and hard, "don't embarrass us, or you know what happens to Leo." She left, slamming the door. I put on the suit. It scratched against my skin. It smelled of mothballs and other people's sweat. I looked in the mirror. I looked ridiculous, a clown in a tragedy. But I smiled, because the more ridiculous I looked, the more satisfying the reveal would be. At 7 o'clock, the music swelled. I heard Richard's booming voice over the microphone welcoming everyone to the Sterling estate. Not my estate. His. I walked out of the room. The hallway was crowded with people holding drinks. They looked at me with curiosity, then disdain. I shuffled my feet, keeping my head down, playing the role. "Oh, look at him," a woman whispered. "Is that the father?" "No," I heard Richard say loudly, his arm around Vinny Moretti. "That is just Lawrence, a distant cousin. Fell on hard times. We let him stay in the guest quarters. He is a bit, you know." He tapped his temple significantly. The guests nodded sympathetically. "So generous of you, Richard," the woman cooed. "Most people would have put him in a home." "We try," Richard said, beaming with false modesty. "Family is everything, right?" I made my way to the bar. The bartender looked at my suit and hesitated. "Water," I croaked. "Just water." He handed me a glass without ice, turning away to serve a man in a tuxedo. I stood in the corner observing. It was a masterclass in deception. Richard and Pamela were working the room like seasoned politicians. They were promising returns on investments they didn't have, selling shares in a development project that didn't exist. They were using my home, my reputation, my name to run one last con. Bradley was by the buffet, sweating through his expensive shirt. Vinny Moretti was never more than 5 feet away from him, a constant, menacing shadow. I saw Vinny whisper something to Bradley, and my son flinched, nodding vigorously. The pressure was building. The pot was about to boil over. Vanessa was the queen of the ball. She floated through the crowd, showing off the house as if she had designed it herself. "And this is the original woodwork," she explained to a group of potential buyers, pointing at the staircase I had sanded by hand 40 years ago. "We are planning to rip it out, of course. Modernize the place. Open concept." I gripped my water glass until my knuckles turned white. They were not just stealing my home. They were planning to erase my history. At 8 o'clock, the music stopped. A spotlight hit the center of the room where a podium had been set up. Richard stepped up to the microphone, tapping it to get attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Thank you for coming tonight. We have a very special announcement. A changing of the guard, so to speak." The crowd quieted. Vinnie Moretti crossed his arms and stared at Bradley. "For 40 years, this house has stood as a monument to the past," Richard continued. "But tonight, we look to the future. My son-in-law, Bradley Sterling, and my daughter, Vanessa, are taking the helm. They have a vision of prosperity, a vision of growth." Applause rippled through the room. Bradley stepped up to the podium looking like he was walking to the gallows. He forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Thank you, Richard," he said, his voice shaking slightly. It is an honor." "And to make this official," Richard said, gesturing to a table set up beside the podium, where a stack of documents lay waiting. "We are signing the transfer of deeds tonight, right here in front of all our friends and partners." He looked around the room, his eyes scanning, until they landed on me in the corner. "Lawrence, come on up here, old boy." The spotlight swung, hitting me. I blinked in the sudden brightness. The crowd parted, making a path for the man in the brown polyester suit. I shuffled forward. I let my hands shake. I looked confused. "Come on," Lawrence, Richard urged. "Time to sign. Time to rest." I walked up the stairs to the stage. Vanessa was there holding a pen. She looked at me with triumph in her eyes. She thought she had won. She thought the game was over. "Just sign here, Lawrence," she whispered, pointing to the line. "And then you can go back to your room. We will bring you some cake." I looked at the document. It was a quitclaim deed transferring the property to Bradley Sterling for the sum of $1. I looked at Bradley. He was staring at the pen, his eyes pleading. "Sign it, Dad," he seemed to be saying. "Save me." I looked at Vinnie Moretti. He was smiling a shark's smile. He knew once that paper was signed, he would get his money. I looked at the crowd. The parasites. The leeches. The vultures. I reached out and took the pen. My hand trembled violently. Vanessa placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. Her nails dug into my cheap suit jacket. Right there, she hissed, "Do not mess this up, old man." I touched the pen to the paper. The ink started to bleed into the fiber. The room held its breath. And then I stopped. I lifted the pen. I looked at Vanessa. I smiled. And this time it wasn't the smile of a senile old man. It was the smile of the CEO who had crushed competitors for breakfast. Actually, I said, my voice booming without the need for a microphone. "I have a question." The silence was instant. Vanessa froze. Richard's smile faltered. "Does this deed include the basement?" I asked. Confusion rippled through the crowd. What Richard asked, stepping forward. "Lawrence, just sign the damn paper," because I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word. "If it includes the basement, then it includes the servers, and the cameras, and the microphones." Vanessa's face went white. Bradley looked like he was going to vomit. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa hissed, squeezing my shoulder hard enough to bruise. "Sign it. Now." I shook her hand off. I stood up straight, shedding the persona of the weak old man like a snake shedding its skin. "I am talking about the recordings, Vanessa," I said. "The recordings of you planning to switch my heart medication. The recordings of you discussing how to make my death look like an accident." Gasps erupted from the crowd. Vinnie Moretti frowned, stepping closer. "He is delirious," Richard shouted, grabbing the microphone. "He is having an episode. Get him off the stage." "Security," he yelled, waving at the 2 bouncers he had hired. But the bouncers didn't move. They were looking at the main entrance, because the doors had just opened, and standing there was Arthur Blackwood, flanked by 4 uniformed police officers and a team of federal agents. "I am not delirious, Richard," I said calmly. "I am prepared." I reached into the pocket of the polyester suit and pulled out a small remote control. I pointed it at the large projection screen behind the podium that had been displaying photos of the house. I pressed the button. The image changed. It wasn't the house anymore. It was a video. High definition. Clear audio. It was the living room from last night. It was Richard holding a glass of scotch. It was Pamela holding a bottle of diet pills. It was Vanessa discussing timelines. It was Bradley asking if it would hurt. The audio boomed through the speakers. "We help nature along. What happens if his blood pressure medication gets mixed up?" The crowd watched in horror. The guests who had been drinking champagne seconds ago were now staring at a snuff film in the making. Richard lunged for me. "Turn it off," he screamed. "It is fake. It is AI. It is a lie." But he didn't get to me. Vinnie Moretti stepped in front of him. Vinnie wasn't smiling anymore. Vinnie didn't like heat. And murder plots brought heat. "You idiots," Vinnie growled, shoving Richard back. I looked at Bradley. He was on his knees. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at the floor, weeping. The video ended. The screen went black. Then a new image appeared. It was a medical file. A fake medical file with a forged signature. "And this," I said, pointing to the screen, "is the competency report you paid $50,000 to a known forger to create. A forger who is currently in FBI custody and singing like a canary." The federal agents moved into the room. The crowd began to scatter, screaming, trying to flee the blast radius of the implosion. But I wasn't done. I looked at Richard, who was trembling. I looked at Pamela, who was trying to hide behind a potted plant. I looked at Vanessa, who was standing there defiant to the end. "You wanted a signing ceremony," I said. "You wanted a transfer of assets." I pulled a document from my inside pocket. A real document. Legal. Binding. "This is not a deed," I said, holding it up. "This is a foreclosure notice." I looked at Richard. "I bought your debt, Richard. Every cent. The mortgages. The credit cards. The business loans. I own it all. And I am calling it in. Tonight." Richard's knees gave out. He collapsed onto the stage. "And you, Bradley," I said, turning to my son. I pulled out another paper. "I bought your note from the syndicate. I paid Vinnie here full price plus a premium. You don't owe them anymore." Bradley looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Dad, you paid it." "I owe you," I said coldly. "And I am a much less forgiving creditor than they are." I dropped the papers on the podium. "The party is over," I said. The police moved in. The handcuffs came out. The flashbulbs from the press. Arthur had tipped off, started popping. I stood on the stage alone in my thrift store suit, watching the empire of lies crumble into dust. They had wanted a show. I gave them one. And the encore was just beginning. The spotlight burned against my skin, hot and accusing, blinding me to the faces in the crowd. But I could feel them. I could feel the weight of their judgment, the collective anticipation of 100 parasites waiting for the host to bleed. The cheap polyester suit scratched at my neck, a constant reminder of the role I was playing, the role of the fool, the mark, the senile old relative who was about to sign away his legacy for the promise of a warm bed and a soft meal. Vanessa stood so close to me I could smell the champagne on her breath, mixed with the metallic tang of her expensive perfume. Her hand rested on my shoulder, a gesture that looked supportive to the audience, but felt like a vice grip to me. Her fingernails dug into the muscle through the thin fabric, sharp and threatening. "Sign it, Lawrence," she whispered, her voice a hiss that didn't travel past the podium. "Do it now, and you get to go back to your room. Hesitate, and you know what happens. You will never see Leo again. We will erase you from his memory." I looked down at the document. The black letters swam before my eyes, not because my vision was failing, but because the rage inside me was vibrating at such a high frequency it blurred the edges of reality. Quitclaim deed, transfer of title, irrevocable. My hand hovered over the signature line. I held the pen loosely, letting it shake, letting the tremor travel up my arm to my shoulder. I wanted them to see the weakness. I wanted them to savor it. Richard was standing to my left, beaming at the crowd, his chest puffed out like a rooster taking credit for the sunrise. He was already spending the money in his head. He was already imagining the boat. He would buy the clubs. He would join, the way he would laugh about this moment over brandy for years to come. "Just a signature, folks," Richard boomed into his own microphone, his voice jovial and fake. "Just a formality to ensure our dear Lawrence is taken care of in his golden years. Family looking out for family." The crowd murmured their approval, a sea of bobbing heads drinking the lie. I lowered the pen tip to the paper. A single drop of ink bled into the fiber, a black tear on the white page. Vanessa's grip tightened. Her breath hitched. She was so close to the finish line she could taste it. Bradley was watching from the side of the stage. He looked pale, sweating through his tuxedo. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at Vinnie Moretti, who was standing near the exit, arms crossed, a silent sentinel of debt. Bradley needed this signature to save his life. He needed to sacrifice his father to save his own skin. I watched my son. I gave him one last second, one last heartbeat to scream, to stop this, to show a shred of decency. He looked away. That was it. The gavel had fallen. My hand stopped shaking. Instantly. Completely. The tremor vanished. The stoop in my shoulders evaporated. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale air of the room, and exhaled the old man I had been pretending to be. I lifted the pen from the paper, leaving only that single black dot. Vanessa frowned. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Sign it." I turned my head slowly to look at her. I didn't look at her with fear. I didn't look at her with confusion. I looked at her with the cold, dead eyes of a man who has buried a wife and is now burying his family. "No," I said. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a croak. It was a word spoken with the weight of granite. Vanessa blinked, confused by the sudden change in tone. "What did you say?" I dropped the pen. It hit the wooden podium and rolled off the edge, clattering onto the stage floor. The sound was small, but in the sudden silence between Richard's boasting, it sounded like a thunderclap. I reached out and grabbed the microphone from its stand. My grip was iron. Richard turned, his smile faltering. "Lawrence, what is the matter? Did you forget how to spell your name? We can help you." I ignored him. I stepped forward into the spotlight, shielding my eyes with one hand so I could see the faces of the vultures. "I have a few words to say before I sign," I announced. My voice boomed through the speakers, deep and resonant, stripping away the artifice of the last few weeks. A ripple of unease went through the room. This wasn't in the script. The crazy old uncle wasn't supposed to speak. He was supposed to sign and disappear. Vanessa tried to grab the microphone. "Lawrence, give me that. You are tired. You need to sit down." I caught her wrist. I didn't squeeze hard, but I held her there, immovable. I looked her in the eye, and for the first time she saw the monster she had poked. "Sit down, Vanessa," I said into the mic. "And listen." She froze. The authority in my voice was absolute. It was the voice that had commanded boardrooms and negotiated union contracts. It was not the voice of a victim. She pulled her hand away, rubbing her wrist, looking at me with a dawn of terror breaking behind her eyes. I looked out at the crowd. You all came here tonight to witness a transfer of wealth, I said. You came to see a senile old man give away his life's work to a group of people who have never worked a honest day in their lives. You came to drink my champagne and eat my food and laugh at my expense. Richard stepped forward, panic setting in. Ladies and gentlemen, Lawrence is having an episode. Please bear with us. The dementia can be very unpredictable. Cut the mic. Someone cut the mic. But the sound guy didn't cut the mic. Because the sound guy was one of Arthur Blackwood's associates, a plant I had installed hours ago. I am not having an episode, Richard, I said, turning to him. I am having a moment of clarity. And I think it is time we shared that clarity with everyone. I reached into the pocket of my polyester suit. I pulled out a small black remote control. Bradley saw it. His eyes widened. He knew that remote. He had seen one just like it in the media room of the house. Dad. No, he whispered. I pointed the remote at the massive projection screen behind me, which had been cycling through photos of the estate photos meant to entice investors. I pressed the button. The screen went black for a second. The room fell into a confused hush. Then a document appeared. It was blown up to 10 feet tall, crisp and clear. It was a medical report. The letterhead was from a psychiatric clinic that did not exist. The diagnosis was severe cognitive decline. The signature at the bottom belonged to Dr. Paul Hayes. Does anyone recognize this document? I asked the room. Richard went white. Vanessa stopped breathing. This is the document my family paid $50,000 to create, I said. $50,000 of stolen money. They paid a known forger, a man currently sitting in an FBI interrogation room, to certify that I was insane. They needed this document to take control of my assets if I refused to sign tonight. Gasps erupted from the floor. People started whispering, pointing at the screen. That is a lie, Richard screamed, his voice cracking. That is a forgery. You made that up, did I asked calmly. I pressed the button again. The screen changed. Now it was a video, high definition, shot from a high angle looking down into my living room. The date stamp in the corner was from 3 nights ago. The audio kicked in, booming through the high-end speakers of the ballroom. It was Richard's voice, clear as a bell. We help nature along. Then Vanessa's voice, sharp and impatient. What happens if instead of lowering his pressure, he takes something that spikes it? Then Pamela's voice, eager and cruel. I have a whole bottle of diet pills in my bag. Imagine what 10 would do to a 70-year-old man. The crowd screamed. It wasn't a figure of speech. People actually screamed. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. A man dropped his drink, and the glass shattered. On the screen, the conversation continued. The conspiracy unfolded in real time. They discussed the dosage. They discussed the timing. They discussed how to make it look like a heart attack. And then the camera zoomed in on Bradley. Will it hurt? He asked on the screen. I looked at the real Bradley standing by the buffet. He had collapsed against the table, sliding down to the floor. He was sobbing, his hands over his ears, trying to block out the sound of his own betrayal. I paused the video on that frame. Bradley's face twisted in cowardly acceptance, looming over the room. I looked at the crowd. That is my son, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, asking if murdering his father will be painful. Not because he cares about my suffering, but because he doesn't want to hear me scream. Vanessa lunged at me. She moved fast, a cornered animal lashing out. You bastard, she screamed. Her fingers curled into claws. Turn it off. She didn't reach me. I didn't even have to move. 2 men in dark suits stepped out from behind the curtain. They weren't party security. They were private contractors, ex-military men Arthur had hired. One of them caught Vanessa by the arm and spun her around, holding her firmly. "Let me go!" she shrieked, kicking and spitting. "This is illegal. You recorded us without consent." I looked at her. "It is my house, Vanessa," I said. "I can record whatever I want in my own home, especially when I am gathering evidence of a conspiracy to commit capital murder." Richard was trying to back away toward the French doors, trying to slip out into the night. "I wouldn't go out there, Richard." I called out to him. He froze, hand on the door handle. Why, he stammered. "Because the police are waiting on the lawn," I said. "And the FBI is waiting in the driveway. And Vinnie Moretti's friends are waiting at the gate. You really don't have anywhere to go." Richard looked at me, then at the door, then back at me. He looked like a man watching his life drain out of a hole in the bottom of a boat. "Lawrence," he pleaded, his voice shifting instantly from arrogance to begging. "It was just talk. We were drunk. We were stressed. We would never have actually done it. It was a joke. A bad joke. A joke," I repeated. I pressed the remote one more time. A new image appeared. It was a photo taken from inside a medicine cabinet. My medicine cabinet. It showed a hand switching the contents of 2 bottles. It showed blue pills being replaced with red ones. The hand wore a distinctive ring. A large, gaudy ruby ring. I looked at Pamela. She was wearing the ring right now. She was clutching her chest, her face the color of ash. "You switched the pills this morning, Pamela," I said. "You didn't wait for the party to end. You wanted to make sure I died tonight. You wanted me to sign the deed, have a glass of champagne, take my medicine, and drop dead before the guests left." Pamela let out a wail and collapsed into a chair, fanning herself frantically. "I didn't mean to," she sobbed. I was just confused." I turned back to the microphone. "There are no jokes here," I said, addressing the room. "There is only greed, and there are only consequences." I looked at the document on the podium. The deed they wanted me to sign. I picked it up. I ripped it in half. Then in half again. I let the pieces flutter down from the stage like confetti at a funeral. "There will be no transfer of assets tonight," I declared. "There will be no inheritance. There will be no bailout." I looked at Bradley huddled on the floor. "You wanted the house, son. You wanted the lifestyle. You wanted the easy way out. Well, you just found the hardest way possible." I signaled to the back of the room. Arthur Blackwood stepped forward, giving the signal. The doors to the ballroom burst open. Uniformed officers flooded in. Their presence was overwhelming. The blue lights from the cruisers outside flashed through the windows, painting the room in a strobe of chaotic justice. "Everyone stay where you are," a sergeant shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. The guests froze. Some were crying. Some were filming. All of them were witnessing the complete and total destruction of the Sterling family name. I stood on the stage, calm amidst the storm. I watched the officers move toward Richard and Pamela. I watched them approach Vanessa, who was still struggling with my security guard. And I watched them walk toward Bradley. He looked up at me as the officers pulled him to his feet. His eyes were wide, filled with terror and confusion. "Dad," he choked out. "Help me, please." I looked at him. I looked at the son I had loved, the son I had protected, the son I had tried to save. And I felt nothing. The well was dry. I leaned into the microphone one last time. "I am not your father," I said. "I am the victim. And you are the defendant." I placed the microphone back on the stand. I straightened my polyester tie. I walked down the stairs of the stage, parting the sea of stunned guests. I walked past Richard, who was hyperventilating. I walked past Vanessa, who was screaming obscenities. I walked past Bradley, who was weeping. I walked out the front door into the cool night air, leaving the circus behind me. I had signed my name on the dotted line of their fate, and the ink was permanent. The officers held them, but they did not drag them away immediately. The sergeant in charge, A man with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much human folly looked at me. He saw the papers still in my hand. He saw the way I commanded the stage, even in a polyester suit that was 2 sizes too big. He sensed there was more to the story, more evidence to be entered into the record of this night, and he gave me the nod. A silent permission to finish the autopsy before the bodies were bagged. I looked down at the chaos I had orchestrated. Richard was slumped in the grip of a burly officer, his face the color of wet dough. Pamela was weeping into her hands, her diamond rings clicking against her teeth. Vanessa was silent, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that did not exist. And Bradley. My son was trying to pull himself together. He was straightening his jacket, trying to summon the arrogance that had sustained him for 40 years. "You cannot do this," he stammered, his voice gaining a shred of hysterical strength. "You can arrest me for talking. But you cannot ruin me. I have resources. I have a position. I am the Vice President of Regional Operations for Sterling Logistics. I have a salary. I have options." I laughed. It was a dry sound, devoid of humor. I stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted, instantly terrified of being caught in the crossfire. I walked until I was standing 3 feet from my son. "Vice President," I repeated. "Yes," Bradley spat. "I have a career. I have my own money. I will hire the best defense attorneys in the state. I will sue you for entrapment. I will sue you for recording me. I will take this house and burn it to the ground." Arthur Blackwood appeared at my side. He moved like a shadow, silent and lethal. He placed a heavy leather-bound binder in my hands. It was the forensic audit of the subsidiary company where I had parked Bradley a decade ago. I opened the binder. The pages were flagged with red sticky notes. "You have a title, Bradley," I said, calmly flipping through the pages. "A title I created. A title I gave you because you could not hold down a job at a fast food restaurant. But a career, no. A career implies work. A career implies contribution." I held up a page covered in highlighted rows. "This is a record of your attendance for the last 5 years," I said. "You have been to the office exactly 14 times, and 6 of those times were for the company Christmas party." "I work remotely," Bradley shouted. "I manage the accounts from home." "Manage?" I asked. "Is that what you call it?" I turned the page. "Here we have a series of invoices," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room, so every creditor, every fake friend, every witness could hear. Invoices for container maintenance. Invoices for fuel surcharges. Invoices for third-party logistics consulting. I looked at him over the rim of the binder. $3 million in 5 years, Bradley. $3 million paid to shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. Companies that have no employees, no offices, and no ships. Companies that list you as the sole beneficiary. Bradley went white. His knees buckled, but the officer held him up. That is standard industry practice," he wheezed. "Consulting fees." "It is embezzlement," I corrected, closing the binder with a snap. "It is corporate theft. It is fraud. And do you know why I know this? Do you know why I have the authority to stand here and accuse you? Because you are a crazy old man," he screamed, desperate to drown out the truth. "You don't know anything about the company anymore. You retired 10 years ago. You are nobody." I handed the binder back to Arthur. I adjusted my cuffs. "I did not retire, Bradley." I stepped back. "There is a difference." I looked around the room, addressing the guests, addressing the employees, addressing the world. You all know Sterling Logistics as a global brand. You see the trucks on the highway. You see the containers at the port. You assume it is a faceless corporation run by a board of directors. I turned back to Bradley. I never took the company public, son. I never sold out. I retained 51% of the voting stock. I am not just a shareholder. I am the chairman of the board. I am the majority owner. I am Sterling Logistics. A collective gasp went through the room. Vinnie Moretti, who had been watching from the shadows with a bemused expression, actually whistled. You own it, Bradley whispered. All of it. Every truck, I said. Every warehouse. Every shipping lane. And every single cent you stole. I stepped closer to him, invading his personal space. You weren't stealing from a faceless entity, Bradley. You weren't skimming off the top of some corporate monolith. You were stealing from me. You were stealing the money I set aside for your son's trust fund. You were stealing the dividends that paid for your mortgage. You were biting the tan that fed you while smiling in my face. I pulled a single sheet of paper from my pocket. It was on company letterhead. As of 5 p.m. this afternoon, I said, holding it up, the board of directors convened an emergency meeting. We voted unanimously to terminate your employment for cause. We also voted to file criminal charges for grand larceny, corporate malfeasance, and wire fraud. I dropped the termination letter at his feet. You are fired, Bradley. And since you used company funds to pay for your legal defense in the past, I think you will find that resource has also dried up. You don't have a salary. You don't have insurance. You don't have a golden parachute. You have nothing. Bradley stared at the paper on the floor. The reality of his destitution hit him harder than the handcuffs. He wasn't just going to prison. He was going to prison broke. I turned away from him. He was a husk, a shell of a man who had hollowed himself out with greed. I turned my attention to Richard and Pamela. They were watching the destruction of their son-in-law with wide, terrified eyes. But there was still a flicker of calculation in Richard's face. He was a survivor, a cockroach. He thought he could scurry away while I stomped on Bradley. Lawrence Richard said, his voice trembling, but attempting a tone of reason. This is a tragedy. Truly. We had no idea Bradley was doing those things. We are shocked. Shocked, Pamela echoed, clutching her pearls. We thought he was a successful businessman. We are victims here too, Lawrence. He lied to us as well. I walked toward them. The crowd parted further, leaving them isolated on an island of parquet flooring. Victims, I asked. Is that the narrative now? Richard nodded vigorously. We were misled. We just wanted to help our daughter. Look, Lawrence, I know things got heated. I know we said some unfortunate things on that tape. But we are family. We can move past this. We can leave tonight, go back to our condo, and let you handle your son. We won't press charges for the recording. We will call it even. Call it even, I repeated, tasting the words. Yes, Richard said, gaining confidence. We go our separate ways. No harm, no foul. I laughed again. This time it was a loud, genuine laugh of disbelief. You think you have a condo to go back to, Richard? Richard frowned. Of course. The penthouse downtown. We have a lease. I signaled Arthur again. He handed me a second folder. This one was blue. I opened it. You don't have a lease, I said. You had a lease. Past tense. Your landlord evicted you 3 days ago for non-payment of rent. You have been squatting. That is why you moved in here so quickly. You didn't come to care for me. You came because you were homeless. Richard's face flushed red. That is a temporary cash flow issue. My investments are tied up in international markets. Once the liquidity is released, there are no investments. Richard, I cut him off. There is no liquidity. There is only a Ponzi scheme that collapsed 2 years ago, leaving 50 retirees destitute. There is only a mountain of debt that you have been hiding under shell companies and false names. I pulled a stack of documents from the folder. I spent the last 3 days shopping, Richard, I said casually. I didn't buy clothes. I didn't buy cars. I went shopping for paper. I held up the first document. This is the mortgage on your summer home in the Hamptons, the one you used to impress your friends. The bank was about to foreclose. I bought the note. I held up the second document. This is the business loan for Prestige Capital, the one personally guaranteed by you and Pamela. The bank classified it as toxic debt. I bought it for pennies on the dollar. I held up a thick stack of papers bound with a rubber bond. And these are your credit card debts. 14 different cards, high interest, defaulted, sold to collection agencies. I took a step closer to him. I bought them all, Richard. Every single one. I went to the agencies, I went to the banks, I went to the private lenders. I spent $2 million buying every liability attached to your name. Richard was shaking his head back and forth as if trying to deny reality. Why, he whispered. Why would you do that? Because I wanted to own you, I said, cold as ice. I dropped the stack of debts into his trembling hands. He fumbled them and they scattered across the floor, surrounding him like dead leaves. I am not your in-law anymore, Richard. I am not your host. I am your creditor, your only creditor. And unlike the banks, I am not interested in a payment plan. I am not interested in restructuring. I leaned in close, my face inches from his. I am calling the notes due tonight, immediately, in full. Richard looked at the papers. He looked at me. I can't pay, he choked out. I don't have it. I know, I said. So I am seizing your assets. I pointed to the door. My team is already at your storage unit. We are seizing the artwork you hid. We are seizing the jewelry Pamela is wearing right now. Pamela screamed, clutching her necklace. You can't take this. It is mine. It was bought with stolen money, Pamela, I snapped. It belongs to the estate. It belongs to me. I pointed to the valet stand outside. And the car. The convertible you drove here. It is listed as collateral on the business loan. I am repossessing it. Richard looked like he was having the heart attack they had planned for me. He clutched his chest, gasping. You are leaving us with nothing, he wheezed. We will be on the street. No, I corrected. You won't be on the street. You will be in a cell. Because the other thing I bought Richard was the evidence file from the SEC investigation. I handed it over to the district attorney this morning, along with the recordings of your conspiracy to commit murder. Richard's legs finally gave way. He fell to the floor amidst the papers of his ruin. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat of his terror. Please, Lawrence, he begged. Mercy. Mercy, I asked. I looked at the table where the champagne flutes stood half empty. I looked at the extravagant food they had ordered while planning to poison me. I looked at the medicine cabinet in my mind, where Pamela had switched the pills. You planned to stop my heart, I said. You planned to kill me for a house. You treated me like a dog in my own home. You laughed at me. You stole my toothbrush. You threw my wife's shoes in the garbage. I looked down at him with absolute contempt. Mercy is for the repentant Richard. You are just sorry you got caught. I turned to the police sergeant. Officer, take them away. They are trespassing on my property, and they owe me a great deal of money. The officers hoisted Richard and Pamela to their feet. Pamela was wailing, kicking her legs, stripping the dignity she prized so highly away in seconds. Richard was catatonic, muttering about market fluctuations and liquidity. I watched them go. I watched my son being led out in cuffs, his head hung low. I watched Vanessa spitting venom at the agents dragging her away. The room was silent save for the weeping of the damned. I stood in the center of the ballroom, the master of a hollow victory. I had won. I had crushed them. I had burned their world to ash. But as I looked around at the stunned faces of the guests, at the untouched food, at the grandeur of the estate, I realized something. I was alone. But for the first time in years, the loneliness didn't feel like a burden. It felt like space. It felt like clean air. I turned to Arthur. "Clear the room," I said. "Send everyone home. I have a house to sell." And as the guests filed out, whispering and staring, I walked to the window and looked out at the night. The war was over. The enemy was vanquished. Now I just had to figure out what to do with the peace. The sergeant moved with a heavy, deliberate gait that signaled the end of the show. He did not look like a man who enjoyed interrupting parties, but he looked like a man who enjoyed catching predators. He walked straight past the trembling form of my son and stopped in front of Richard, who was currently trying to loosen his tie as if the silk knot were the only thing constricting his breathing. "Richard. Charles Davenport." The sergeant said, his voice carrying the weight of the state. "You are under arrest." Richard blinked, his eyes watering. "Arrested? For what?" "Trespassing. I told you I have a lease. It is a civil matter. You cannot arrest a man for a civil dispute during a dinner party." The sergeant pulled a set of handcuffs from his belt. The metal clicked ominously. "Not for trespassing, Mr. Davenport. For securities fraud, wire fraud, and operating a Ponzi scheme. The SEC unsealed the indictment an hour ago, thanks to the evidence provided by Mr. Sterling. Oh, and let us not forget the local charges. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder." Richard let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Murder. I never touched him. Look at him. He is standing right there. He is fine. You cannot arrest me for talking. It was just talk." "We have the audio of you discussing dosage and disposal methods," the sergeant said, impassively grabbing Richard's wrist. "We have the video of your wife switching the medication. That is an overt act, Mr. Davenport. That makes it a conspiracy. Turn around." Richard didn't turn around. Instead, his face went from the color of ash to a deep, terrifying shade of purple. He grabbed his left arm, his fingers digging into the fabric of his expensive rental tuxedo. His eyes bulged. "My chest," he gasped. "My chest. I can't breathe." It was a performance I had seen him attempt before. Usually when a waiter brought a check he didn't want to pay, or when an investor asked for their money back, he would feign illness to escape accountability. "Stop acting, Richard," I said from the stage, my voice devoid of sympathy. "The ambulance won't save you from the booking photo." But then he collapsed. It wasn't a graceful, theatrical swoon. He dropped like a stone, his knees hitting the hardwood with a sickening crack that echoed through the silent ballroom. He rolled onto his back, clutching his chest, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. "Help me," he wheezed, his voice barely a whistle. "It hurts." "Oh God, it hurts," Pamela screamed. She tried to rush to him, but an officer caught her arm. "He is dying," she shrieked. "You are killing him. Lawrence, do something. He is having a heart attack." I looked down at the man who had planned to stop my heart with diet pills. I looked at the man who had joked about my death looking like natural causes. The irony was so sharp it felt like a physical blow. The stress of his own malice turning back on him, the poison of his greed finally stopping the flow of blood to his own heart. The sergeant knelt beside him. He checked Richard's pulse. He looked up at me and nodded. "It is real," he said. "Call the paramedics." But he didn't unlock the handcuffs. Even as Richard writhed on the floor, gasping for air, the sergeant clicked the metal cuffs around his wrists, securing his hands behind his back while he convulsed. "You are under arrest," the sergeant repeated calmly to the dying man. "You have the right to remain silent." I watched them work on him. I watched the police medic try to stabilize the man who wanted me dead. I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No pity. Just a cold observation of cause and effect. He had spent his life stealing the lifeblood of others, and now his own engine had seized up. "Get him up," the sergeant ordered. 2 officers hoisted Richard up. He was barely conscious, his feet dragging on the floor, his head lolling to the side. They didn't put him on a stretcher. They dragged him toward the door like a sack of garbage. Pamela was next. She didn't fight. She didn't run. She just stood there staring at her husband, being dragged away, and she froze. The officer approached her, holding out the cuffs. "Pamela Davenport, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and accessory to fraud." She held out her wrists. Her eyes were dead. She looked at me one last time. "I just wanted to be comfortable," she whispered. "Comfort is expensive, Pamela," I said, "and you just ran out of credit." They led her away. The room was clearing out. The guests had fled the moment the handcuffs came out, leaving behind half-eaten canapés and a heavy atmosphere of scandal. Vinnie Moretti had vanished into the night, like smoke, having seen that there was no money to be collected here. Only Bradley remained. My son was still on the floor where he had collapsed. He was on his knees, staring at the spot where Richard had fallen. He looked like a child who had woken up in a nightmare. He slowly turned his head to look at me. I was still standing on the stage, the master of the house, the architect of his ruin. "Dad," he croaked. He began to crawl. He didn't stand up. He didn't walk. He crawled across the polished floor, his tuxedo pants sliding on the wood. He crawled toward me like a penitent seeking absolution. I stayed still. I watched him come. He reached the edge of the stage. He reached up and grabbed the hem of my trousers. His grip was weak, trembling. "Dad, please," he sobbed. "I didn't mean it. I was scared. They made me do it. Vanessa, she said it was the only way. I didn't want you to die. I asked if it would hurt because I didn't want you to suffer." I looked down at him. I looked at the top of his head, the hair thinning just like mine had at his age. "You asked if it would hurt," I said, my voice low and terrible, "because you wanted to assuage your own guilt. You wanted a clean murder, Bradley. You wanted the money without the screams. No, Dad, no." He wept, burying his face against my leg. "I am your son. I am your boy. You can't let them take me. You can't let me go to prison. I will die in there. I am not strong like you." He was right. He wasn't strong. He was soft. He was weak because I had made him weak. I had sheltered him from every storm, and now he was drowning in the first rain he faced alone. "Please, Dad," he begged, tightening his grip on my leg. "I will change. I will do whatever you want. Just tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you gave me permission. Use your money. Buy the lawyers. Save me. Save me." That was all he knew. That was his entire existence, waiting for me to open the checkbook and make the bad things go away. I felt a movement to my right. One of the private security contractors Arthur had hired, a man named Stone, who was 6'4" and built like a tank, stepped forward. He didn't ask for permission. He saw a threat. He saw a man grabbing his client. Stone moved with a speed that belied his size. He didn't gently remove Bradley. He didn't ask him to let go. He stepped in and delivered a sharp, brutal kick to Bradley's ribs. Bradley yelped, letting go of my leg and rolling backward onto the floor, clutching his side. "Get back," Stone barked, standing between me and my son. "Do not touch Mr. Sterling." Bradley looked up, gasping for air. He looked at Stone, then at me. "Dad," he whispered, betrayed. "You let him kick me." I looked at Stone. I could have reprimanded him. I could have told him to be gentle. "Good work, Stone," I said. Bradley's eyes widened. The realization hit him then. The realization that there was no safety net. There was no father left to hide behind. "You are a monster," Bradley hissed, spitting blood from a bitten lip. "I am a mirror," I replied. "I am showing you exactly what you are." The police officers who had been waiting in the wings approached. They pulled Bradley to his feet. He didn't fight them. He went limp. "You are under arrest, Bradley Sterling," the officer said, reciting the words that marked the end of his life as he knew it. He didn't look at me as they cuffed him. He stared at the floor. I watched them march him out. I watched my only child, the legacy I had hoped to leave behind, being led away in chains to pay for crimes he committed against the man who gave him life. The doors swung shut behind them. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and purifying. I stood on the stage alone. The ballroom was empty save for Arthur and the security team. The debris of the party lay scattered around me. The broken glass, the spilled wine, the torn deed. It was a scene of devastation. But as I looked around, as I took a deep breath of the air that no longer smelled of my son's desperation or my in-laws' greed, I realized something profound. The house was quiet. For the first time in weeks, the house was truly quiet. I walked down the stairs. Stone stepped aside respectfully. Arthur met me at the bottom. "It is done, Lawrence," Arthur said softly. "They are gone." "Yes," I said, adjusting my jacket. "They are gone." I walked to the table where the champagne tower stood untouched. I picked up a glass. I didn't drink it. I just held it, looking at the bubbles rising to the surface, trying to escape. I had cut off the limb to save the body. It was the necessary surgery. But the phantom pain was already setting in. I put the glass down. "Lock the doors, Arthur," I said, turning toward the hallway. "And turn off the lights. I am going to bed." And for the first time in 10 years, I knew I would sleep. Not the sleep of the just, perhaps, but the sleep of the survivor. And tonight, that was enough. "Hold it!" I shouted. My voice cut through the cacophony of crackling radios and idling engines. The sergeant paused, his hand resting on top of Bradley's head, ready to push him into the back of the cruiser. He looked back at me, questioning. I walked down the stone steps of the porch, my shoes crunching on the gravel. The night air was biting, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt only the heat of unfinished business. "I am not finished with them yet," I said, approaching the convoy of police vehicles. "Mr. Sterling," the sergeant said patiently, "we need to process them. You can make a statement at the station." "I don't want to make a statement," I said, stopping in front of my son. "I want to make a withdrawal." I looked at Bradley. He was slumped against the car, his eyes vacant, a man whose soul had left the building, leaving only a husk of fear behind. But on his wrist, glinting under the harsh strobe of the police lights, was a Rolex Submariner, a watch I had bought him for his 30th birthday, a watch he wore while plotting to stop my heart. "That watch," I said, pointing to it. "Take it off." Bradley blinked, looking down at his wrist as if he had forgotten it was there. "Dad," he whimpered. It was a gift." "It was a gift for a son," I replied. "You are not a son. You are a failed investment, and I am liquidating the assets." I held out my hand. The officer looked at the sergeant. The sergeant shrugged. "It is his property." The officer uncuffed one of Bradley's hands. With trembling fingers, Bradley unclasped the heavy gold band. He dropped it into my palm. It felt heavy, warm from his skin. I put it in my pocket. "And the cufflinks," I added. "The diamond ones." Bradley hesitated. Those were mine." I cut him off. "You stole them from my dresser 3 years ago. I knew it then, but I didn't say anything because I wanted to believe you just borrowed them. Give them back." He fumbled with his sleeves, removing the small shimmering stones. He handed them over. He stood there, sleeves flapping open, stripped of his status, stripped of his shine. I moved down the line to Vanessa. She was being held by a female officer near the second cruiser. When she saw me approach, her eyes narrowed into slits of pure hatred. "Come to gloat, Lawrence," she spat. "You think you have won. You haven't won anything. You are just a sad, lonely old man who is going to die in a big, empty house." I ignored her venom. I looked at her hand. "The ring," I said. She curled her fingers into a fist. "Go to hell. That is my wedding ring. It is a 4-carat diamond solitaire set in platinum," I recited. "Paid for with a check from my personal account, because Bradley told me he couldn't afford the ring you deserved. He was right. He couldn't. And neither can you." I looked at the female officer. "That ring is proceeds from a crime," I said. "It was obtained under false pretenses. I want it returned." The officer looked at Vanessa. "Ma'am, give him the ring, or we can add theft to the charge sheet." Vanessa let out a shriek of frustration. She yanked the ring off her finger, scratching her skin in the process. She threw it at me. It bounced off my chest and landed in the gravel. I didn't pick it up. I let it lie there in the dirt. "And the keys," I said. "To the Mercedes." "It is my car," she screamed. "It is in my name." "The lease is in your name," I corrected. "The payments come from a trust I control, a trust I dissolved 10 minutes ago. Without the payments, the car is repo bait. I am just saving the bank the trouble of towing it." The officer reached into Vanessa's clutch, which had been confiscated, and pulled out the fob. She handed it to me. I looked at the sleek black car parked on the grass. It was a beautiful machine. Far too beautiful for a woman with such an ugly heart. I turned back to the house. I had what I wanted. I had stripped them of the costumes they wore to play the part of success. Now they were just criminals in formal wear. "Wait." Vanessa's scream stopped me. It wasn't a scream of anger this time. It was a scream of desperation. A Hail Mary pass thrown into the abyss. "You can't let them take me," she yelled, struggling against the officer's grip. "Lawrence, listen to me. You are making a mistake. A huge mistake." I turned slowly. I looked at her with mild curiosity. "And what mistake is that, Vanessa?" "I am pregnant," she screamed. The silence that fell over the driveway was absolute. Even the police radios seemed to quiet down. Bradley's head snapped up. He stared at his wife, his jaw dropping. "What?" he whispered. "I am pregnant," Vanessa repeated louder, looking wildly between me and Bradley. "I am carrying your grandchild, Lawrence, your heir. You can't send a pregnant woman to prison. The stress, it could hurt the baby. You have to drop the charges. For the baby." She looked at me, her eyes pleading, trying to summon tears, trying to evoke the biological imperative of a grandfather. I looked at Bradley. He looked stunned, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes, a belief that maybe this was the exit ramp. Maybe this was the miracle that saved them. "Is it true?" Bradley asked her. "Yes, baby, yes." Vanessa sobbed, nodding frantically. "I was going to tell you tonight. After the party. It is a boy. I know it is a boy. We were going to name him Lawrence. After your father." She looked at me, a triumphant glint returning to her eyes. She thought she had found my weakness. She thought the Sterling bloodline was her get-out-of-jail-free card. I reached into my inside pocket. I didn't pull out a handkerchief. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a medical report. Not the fake one they had made for me. A real one. I walked over to Bradley. "She says she is pregnant, son," I said, my voice soft, almost gentle. "Yes," Bradley breathed, hope illuminating his face. "Dad, a baby. Another chance." I handed him the paper. "Do you remember 5 years ago," I asked, "when you went to the private clinic in Switzerland? You told everyone it was a ski trip. But you and I knew the truth. You went for a procedure." Bradley froze. The color drained from his face faster than blood from a wound. He looked at the paper in his hand. It was a urology report. "You had a vasectomy, Bradley," I said loud enough for Vanessa to hear. "You told me you didn't want any more children. You told me you wanted to protect your lifestyle. You made me promise never to tell Vanessa because you didn't want to have the fight." Bradley looked at the paper. Then he looked at Vanessa. Vanessa's face had gone slack. The triumph was replaced by the hollow look of someone who realizes they have stepped onto a landmine. "Bradley," she stammered. I can explain. The procedure, sometimes they reverse themselves. It happens. It is a miracle. Medical miracles are rare." "Vanessa," I said, cold as the grave. "Adultery, however, is very common." I turned to the sergeant. "Officer, if she is indeed pregnant, I suggest you look for the father in her contact list. I believe his name is Dave, the neighbor. My investigators have a very interesting folder of photos regarding their afternoon meetings." Bradley let out a sound that wasn't human. It was the howl of a wounded animal. He didn't look at me. He looked at his wife. The wife who had spent his money. The wife who had convinced him to kill his father. The wife who was now carrying another man's child while wearing his name. "You!" Bradley choked out. He lunged. He threw himself at the police car separating them, trying to get to her. He wasn't crying anymore. He was screaming inarticulate rage. "You lied to me!" he shrieked, thrashing against the cuffs. "You ruined everything!" Vanessa recoiled, shrinking away from him, her face a mask of terror. "Get them out of here," I said, turning my back on them. The officers slammed the doors shut, muffling the screams. The engines roared to life. One by one, the cruisers pulled away, their red and blue lights dancing across the facade of my empty house. I watched them go until the taillights disappeared around the bend of the driveway. I stood there in the dark, holding the cheap watch, the diamond cufflinks, and the keys to a car I would never drive. I looked down at the gravel, where the platinum ring still lay glittering in the moonlight. I kicked it aside. It was just metal. Cold, hard, and ultimately worthless. I walked back up the steps to my front door. I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me but dust and lies. I went inside and locked the door, turning the deadbolt with a solid, satisfying click. I was alone. And for the first time in a very long time, I was safe. The sun came up over the estate, washing the gray stone in a light that felt cleaner than it had in years. The silence was absolute. No screaming in laws. No weeping sun, just the birds and the wind in the trees. I stood in the foyer one last time. It didn't feel like my home anymore. It felt like a museum of a war I had finally won. I looked at the spot on the floor where Richard had collapsed. I looked at the wall where Vanessa had thrown the porcelain angel. The memories were there, but the pain was gone, replaced by a quiet numbness. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of the city's most aggressive real estate broker. She picked up on the first ring. "Sell it," I said. She started to ask about the listing price, about the market conditions, about staging the furniture. I cut her off. "I don't care about the price. Sell it today. Sell it as is. Sell it to a developer who wants to tear it down for all I care. Just get it off my books." "And the proceeds, Lawrence?" she asked, sensing the finality in my tone. "Where do you want the funds wired?" "To the Catherine Sterling Scholarship Fund," I said. "For underprivileged youth who want to learn a trade. I want that money to build futures, not destroy them. I want it to go to kids who know the value of an honest day's work." I hung up the phone. I walked out the front door and locked it behind me, leaving the keys under the mat for the agent. I walked down the steps to my old Ford truck. It was waiting for me, faithful and rusted. But the passenger seat wasn't empty this time. Sitting there, tail thumping a rhythmic beat against the worn upholstery, was Barnaby. He was an old golden retriever I had picked up from the shelter that morning. He had gray on his muzzle and a limp in his back leg. He was unwanted, abandoned, and seen as a burden by his previous owners because he was too old to play. We had a lot in common. I climbed into the driver's seat. Barnaby licked my hand, his eyes full of a simple gratitude that my own family had never shown me. I patted his head. "Ready to go, boy?" I asked. He barked once. I turned the key. The engine roared to life with a cough and a sputter that sounded like music. I put the truck in gear and pulled away. I drove down the long gravel driveway past the spot where the police cruisers had flashed their lights past the gate that had failed to keep the monsters out. I reached the main road and turned west toward the coast. I didn't check the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there for me. No legacy. No heir. Just a house full of ghosts and a family tree that had needed pruning. People tell you that blood is thicker than water, as if that is an excuse for abuse. As if sharing DNA gives someone the right to bleed you dry. But I learned the hard way that blood is just biology. Family is not about whose name you carry. Family is about who stands beside you when the walls are falling down. It is about who respects you when you have nothing to give them but your time. I lost a son that night. I lost the illusion of the golden years I thought I was owed. But as the city skyline faded behind me and the open road stretched out toward the horizon, limitless and bright, I realized I had gained something far more valuable. I had my dignity back. I had my peace. And for the first time in 40 years, I was driving my own life. The map was blank, the tank was full, and I was finally free. We often confuse enabling with loving. I spent years shielding my son from reality, thinking I was protecting him, but I was only feeding his entitlement. The painful truth is that you cannot buy respect, and you cannot inherit character. Real family isn't defined by DNA. It's defined by loyalty and how they treat you when you have nothing to offer. Never set yourself on fire to keep others warm, even if they are your own flesh and blood. Your dignity is the most expensive thing you own. Never let anyone bargain for it. If you believe justice was served today, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments, did I go too far with my son, or was it the only way to finally save him?